Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for every day that you've blessed us with. Please look after our citizens and those that are struggling. Please embrace them with understanding, courage, strength, and perseverance. And Lord, please watch over this board, please, and both boards tonight. Please let us do your will. In your name and your glory we pray. Amen.
Mr. Chairman, first item is the approval of your agenda.
We have a motion to approve the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Skinner.
I'd like to make a motion that we pull public presentations and board reports from this agenda. That was agreed upon at our last meeting when we asked for a special board meeting with the school board. It's not appropriate. I'm sorry. It is not appropriate that we have public comments during a special meeting. It was set up to be a work session, and that is the way that. So my motion is to accept the agenda with just the work session and to pull public presentation and board reports out.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I see there are people out here that are speaking. I always support the public coming to our meetings. I have no idea what they're going to speak about. I have a couple ideas of a few of them. I'd like to put a substitute motion on that we approve the agenda as published.
We have a substitute motion.
I'd like to add one more comment if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Skinner.
I'm almost ready to bet my check, my next paycheck. I know exactly what's going to be brought up here. And I think it was wrong because I've seen what's going on. This is just another way to bring presentations to this board. We are very sorry what's happening to a certain family out there. Very sorry. But this should not be taken that way. We have a job to do. We called, y'all told us we're going to have a special meeting. And then behind our back, we get people call and say, do this. Never once was I called by anybody to say, can we add this to it? I know exactly what people are going to come up here and say. Pretty much so. I won't say 100%, but I'm pretty close, just like Mr. Ross just said. He's pretty sure what's going to be said up here. And I think it's wrong that we were put in this position to begin with, sir.
Okay.
The approval of this board to sit here tonight was to do a school board work session, and that's what it was.
Okay. Any other, Mr. Ross?
I just say I can't remember a work session or any other session we haven't had public presentations given. Maybe we have.
Special.
Excuse me, Mr. Skinner. Even special meetings. I don't recall ever. There might be one, but I can't recall it. So I'll just put that out there.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. I do believe I was the one that had mentioned that we should have a meeting with the school board, whether it was quarterly or not. When it was brought up last week, there was no discussion whatsoever of having public presentations. I think that if we invite the school board to be here to have a meeting for a special meeting, then that's what the meeting should be. I am dismayed that this was added to the public agenda and put out there without this board approving the agenda to be set as such. Like I said, at last week's meeting, nothing was said about adding these. It came up afterwards. And so I don't think that we should have it. I think we should get right to the work session with the school board.
Any other discussion? All right, I'll just make a quick comment. I was advised it only takes 2 board members to agree to put this on there. I've had 2 on each of these topics. They were kind of last minute, I understand. So I understand your frustration, but at the point, I did call everybody on the presentation portion. Some called back, some didn't. The majority, though, was, be quite honest, I got a response if I didn't care, and be quite honest, that's the one I at the time that I was hit with it, it didn't bother me to have a public presentation. So I apologize if I've inconvenienced this board. We have a substitute motion on the floor from Mr. Ross that we approve the agenda as is. Mr. Yakubowski?
No.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
No.
All right. Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Dr. Trampy? Aye. And chair's aye.
Mr. Chair.
And Amy, I'm sorry, I totally blew past the electronic voting.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to add a motion then to this too.
Okay.
The agenda. I would like to make that the school board session goes first, because that's what we invited them to do. We came out here to work with the session. If you want the public comments, I think it's a little bit of an embarrassment on our part to the school that they're planning to come here and work with us, and now we're going to put up, 20, 30 minutes? I'm sorry. I would like to make the motion that the agenda reads as school board. You've already want the public comment, that's fine. But I think we owe it to the school board, and it's insulting to them that they have to come in here knowing there was a work session and then all of a sudden have to listen to public comment. And my motion is to move the school board session to the first part of the agenda and allow public comment afterwards and board reports too. That's my motion.
Yeah, I think we already approved the agenda. Didn't we?
I'm asking the agenda to be moved. I can always come back and ask for a rearrangement of the agenda.
Charles, I guess again.
The board approved this agenda as a motion. So typically pursuant to Robert's rules, there would be somebody on the prevailing side who would have to call that back to reorder the agenda. That's my reading on it. But again, it's the board's bylaws, so it's certainly it's up to the chair and then to the board.
All right, well, we approved the agenda as is. We already have citizens that, and
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Trample.
I will, as having been on the prevailing side, I move to rearrange the agenda, as Mr. Skinner said.
All right, motion by Dr. Trampy to rearrange the agenda as Mr. Skinny suggests. Mr. Skinner.
Mr. Chair, this will be two votes. One to reconsider, and the second one would be for the new thing. So the first vote would be to reconsider the previous
All
motion.
right, we'll do a call question to reconsider the order of the agenda. We can go ahead and electronically do it this time, I'm assuming.
I don't have it up yet. Nope.
It went down to cancel, but you had to look in the middle. It was still.
I know.
Approve the agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe some card. Hold on.
All right,
It's on now.
all right, so we have a motion to,
4 yes,
4 yeses.
with Mr. Benton, Mr. McLaughlin, and Mr. Ross voting no.
All right, so we can.
Now it would be appropriate for Mr. Skinner's motion to reorder.
All right. You want to make the
Yeah.
motion by
Dr.
Mr. Skinner
Trampy
to?
had to do it.
I move that we approve the agenda with the school work session first.
Discussion.
Mr. Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say for the school board, for my vote, I am not doing this to insult you or anything. I believe we have public citizens out here that have come out to speak, and I know that you serve the public like we do. And so my vote is going to be no, not to insult you. There's no insult, but to honor the public as we both serve the public. I would like them to be able to speak that have come out here. So that's why I'll be voting against this, but not to insult the school board, as Mr. Skinner has said, could be the reason why we would vote to have the public come first. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Real quick, this doesn't move the closed session. That's still last, correct?
Any others? All right. Amy, can we just do a voice vote? This doesn't seem to be working again, so.
Aye.
All right, Mr. Yakubowski, Mr. McLaughlin,
No.
Mr. Ross.
Nay.
Mr. Skinner,
Yes.
Mr. Marshall. Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair's nay. It passes. So we'll have the joint board meeting first. exactly how we did before with your representative.
Hold on. Okay, sorry. Hello, school board. We have a quorum this evening. Can I need a motion to approve the distributed agenda?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. And please note for the minutes that we have 2 board members not present, Mr. Twig and Mrs. Phelps. And good evening, Board of Supervisors. So we created the agenda, Mr. Benton and I, for the purpose that was the special meeting request, which was some budget questions. So we started with the budget information, and then our last work session, we mentioned last year, we mentioned the revenue sharing agreement. And so this would be a year since we discussed that the first time. So I figured we would discuss what we had found, the research we had done. We have a couple different charts to distribute about that or to talk about, and we can not have to bring that up again once we discuss it, and then just some follow-up questions. So if you want to start, Mr. Benton, with the opening comments, and I guess there's a state budget update from Mr. Cole, correct?
Mr. Cole? Oh, yeah. You got that? You going to give us something? I don't really have any opening statements other than to thank you for coming and hopefully have some good communication and conversation.
Well, we were informed via email that Mr. Cole would start the work session.
Well,
with the
yeah,
budget
I
update.
can, and, basically, what happened with the state budget, the Senate Finance Committee reported out their version of the state budget and sent it to the Senate floor. The main sticking point, again, was Medicaid expansion and the hospital tax. The Senate version that reported out of the Finance Committee did not have Medicaid expansion or the hospital tax in it. However, once it got to the floor today, Senator Hanger introduced a substitute to add that to the Senate version of the budget, and they will vote on it tomorrow morning, and then the House will go in session tomorrow at noon, and we'll see what the status is then. I'm not sure if we'll have a budget done tomorrow or not.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
All right, let's just start with the budget wrap-up. The reason for the special meeting that was requested earlier. The links to our 3 work sessions were emailed to the Board of Supervisors last week, our work session and our 2 meetings. They had the presentations that addressed the topics that were of concern, and we included tonight a copy of the PowerPoint from Monday's presentation that directly addressed what was brought up at the Board of Supervisors meeting. And I guess we're just here to answer any further questions that you guys have had since you've watched the presentations and now have the PowerPoint.
Any comments from the board? Okay. I guess not. So I get for this, what was the total amount? Actually, I've heard and seen different things, so I want to make sure I'm clear on the actual amount that was located, saved, that you were able to provide some extra monies for the raises. What was the final amount?
So yes, sir. Good evening, school board members, board of supervisor members. When you look at the presentation that's before you, if you draw your attention to page number 10 or slide number 17, at the top of it, it basically says, I think others may have their mics on. It says Evergreen Study Update for Non-Teachers. So when Dr. Baker presented his initial budget, the estimated cost for the Evergreen study for our non-teachers, which was bring to minimum for 1 year, and, yes,
We don't have,
Page 9, slide 7.
okay.
Slide 17.
Team,
Slide
yes.
numbers are in the bottom corner.
so if you look at page 9, slide 17. And at the top of that one, you will see the title of the slide. It says Evergreen Study Update for Non-Teachers. Is everyone there?
I think so.
Okay, so to answer your question, the initial estimated impact was $967,000. That basically consisted of 594 employees. Based on the analysis that we had to do in working with Evergreen and basically looking through almost 594 personnel files, we were able to determine that we had about 61 employees who basically had a change in assignment. With that, we were able to save $364,000 that you see there. Then if you look at the next line, approximate savings for employees who were no longer with the school division, we had about 75. Savings there, $72,000. So the total savings was $436,000. So we went from an original estimate of $967 down to $531. So when you look at this analysis, keep in mind that the data that was provided to Evergreen was from November 2016. And now we're in the process of preparing a budget for FY19. So for the most part, you're basically crossing fiscal years.
Okay. And Mr. Marshall, go ahead.
So, you're fine. I'm loud enough. When you look at these numbers, and I understand that these numbers came from 2016, and we're implementing this study in 2019. Were there any savings from these changes in positions? And the changes in positions, I can understand there being very little savings there, but for folks that are no longer employed for a 3-year period, were there savings through 17 and 18 also?
This is the first year of the school's implementation of the study, so there's nothing to save.
Well, if there's somebody that we're no longer paying a paycheck to, there's savings.
But that's already in the budget,
So, so this
in our
slide-
operating budget from year to year. This is just the Evergreen impact in the estimate for FY19.
So to answer your question, you are correct. So from November 16th until the time when the staff was looking at the data, March of 2018, we basically saw that you had 594 people. 75 were no longer with us from that time period, November 16 to March 2018.
Gotcha.
So with that, because they were lower level staff, we did save $72,000.
Okay,
That's your number you're
that's the
looking for,
number
yeah.
we're looking for.
Mr. Marshall, if I can also, I think there may be another a part to your question, and I think it's important to note, especially when we're working with estimates, based on, not only individual employees, but the group as a total. So it is possible that between the time that this analysis was done or completed in April, that we could have additional folks that will leave the school division that are currently a part of this. And I doubt that it's going to be any significant savings. But I think to your point, as we go into next year, could we have additional folks to leave the system? And that might even be a part of what we would consider lapsed dollars.
But remember, if they leave, we still hire people back. It just might be at a different years of service. It might be at a different qualification. It might be at a different degree level, and those all affect our pay scale. So there's always a varying in the turnover for the schools.
And that's really no different for the schools versus the county.
So just to be clear, so you hired 75 people back. You have more school employees today than you did in 2016?
So yes, we do, because of the fact, when you look at our budget, we did approve 60 new positions. So our FTE count is 3,188. But when you look at these individuals here, the 75, based on the analysis here, we're not saying we've hired these individuals back. Those increases are not included. Because per the Evergreen study, they weren't here in November 2016, so therefore they're not due a pay raise.
See, I think that's the confusion that maybe a lot of us on the board are having, is that they're comparing a study that was in 16 Evergreen, and somehow that's not what you budgeted to. So there's the staff you budgeted to.
So when you look at the study, November 16, that is the data that Evergreen used to determine what employees were at below market, at market, and above.
Right.
So based on that, that is the data you have to use in order to determine who is due a pay raise. You can't use another set of data. Because if you do, those individuals were not reviewed by Evergreen. You have to review with Evergreen.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of the confusion, understanding we have the Evergreen software. We could have updated that at any time, right, Mr. Taylor? I thought that was the whole purpose. Once we had this, we probably should have updated it in 17 and 18 before we went forward with a budget.
And that's exactly what we did. We took the information from Evergreen when we met with them February and March, and we shared with them the data. And in sharing with them the data, this is what we've done. We've updated it. So in updating it, we saved funding because the employees are no longer with us or job changes. So we did exactly what you said.
Okay, so, and again, I think it's confusing because we're using different sets of data. And I guess that's where it makes it difficult, is that we don't have less employees. You've just hired more employees at a lower rate. Is that the case or not?
Not in this case, no.
So the 75 people are where?
So the 75 people in terms of bus drivers, cafeteria workers, have those positions been backfilled? Probably so.
Right. So those are still there.
But not these individuals here that are due a pay raise. They're no longer here. They're no longer entitled to a pay raise.
Right.
They're no longer with the
But
division.
there probably are 75 additional employees, different employees on the school system.
Correct.
At a total cost savings of $75,000.
Your savings is coming from these individuals who are no longer with you. They're no longer due a pay raise.
Those specific people.
Correct, sir.
Right. All right. And then the 364,000.
So those individuals basically are individuals since the study, basically, not since the study, but when we reviewed the study, their particular analysis for their pay raise was based on a hire date, their original hire date, versus the current hire date. So with that, if you had, let's say, for example, a para who had been with the school division since 2010, when you go to do the Evergreen study, the analysis should be based on a most current position, which would have been a bookkeeper.
Right.
So when you look at a bookkeeper, you're going to look at where does the market say their salary should have been, and you're going to update based on that.
So these 61 people are in the school system.
Yes, sir.
But they're paid at a lower rate based on their classification.
Not necessarily a lower rate, but their cost analysis for their pay raise is based over a shorter period of time. Therefore, the amount that was due to them was less.
So
therefore, you saved.
Okay. And then this 531,000 was enough to cover the additional 2%?
Then the 500, so plus we had some staff that were not a part of the Evergreen study. So in order to bring them up to at least 4%, that's where we use the additional 436,000 that was saved. And that brings you back to the 967,000 plus a small difference of 57,000 on top of that, that we reallocated.
Dr. Trampy?
Had somewhat of a head-nodding agreement that we would both implement the study, the mid-level, over 3 years. Is that still where you are?
Yes, sir.
I think the concern that's been raised is from employees on the county side that they feel there was this agreement, and it seems like, at least for non-teachers, you were going above and beyond that. Now, it has happened the other way around. I remember it was 2013, it was on our last day to pass the FY 2014 budget, and the superintendent had the county's half to match the state for, I think it was a 4% raise. And so one of my colleagues was arguing, we've got to give the county employees that raise, and I pointed out that that's in the superintendent's budget, but we're not giving them the money to do that. So I didn't think the teachers were going to get that raise, and they didn't, and it turned out the county side did. So it has happened the other way around, but I think the concern that has been raised has mostly from county employees feeling that the schools are going above and beyond what was agreed to, whereas the county employees are being left behind. So I'll just leave that there. You mentioned the 60 employees. It was to be 120 over 3 years. I know it's very, very early. Do you have any estimate on how many of the remaining 60 will be in next year's budget?
And now you're speaking to additional staffing resources, I believe.
Right.
I'm going to refer that to Dr. Baker.
We're, those projections, both for the staffing and the pay raise, were intended to be estimates for 3 years. So that's the 30 additional positions is still the estimate for next year at this point. And, but to maybe another discussion later, maybe it would help if we detect earlier on that we are going to change that, and that we try to, forecast that to the county throughout the fall and not just when the budget presentations come. But right now, 30 over next year and then also for FY21 is still the estimate.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Evergreen study, you're implementing it in a 3-year phase, is that correct?
Yes,
Like
sir.
we are. I
Yes.
believe we're doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So just so I understand it and can explain it to other people, the 4%, is that what it takes to implement this study, this phase of the first one? Or is it a 2% and then a 2% COLA? Well, how is that broken down? Because, so when people ask us, we can tell them, because there's nothing wrong. We have to implement the Evergreen. If it takes that amount of money, then we should do it over the 3-year phase. So how does that actually work?
Mr. Skinner, if I might, I'm going to do my best to answer that question, but also, and I'm not trying to change anything up, but I'm just going to use different language, because I know that the language that is used is that we're implementing an Evergreen study. What we are doing is we are trying to execute a compensation plan to benefit our employees that is informed and based on that Evergreen study. But I don't think it would be accurate to say that we're just implementing an Evergreen study, because they provided a variety of solutions, 3 different solutions actually. And even within our consultation for them, they were, we'd say, well, what if we went this way? They said, well, you could do that. And so it was more trying to determine, both from a cost standpoint, but also what would be most appropriate for our employees, given not only the large number that we have, but the number of different types of employee groups that we're serving and that we're trying to support. And so I want to try to, as crystal clear as I can, again, break down the categories of how we're doing this. Evergreen provided 3 different solutions. The range penetration, that was, I think, from Dr. Trampy's example, was the most expensive one. That was a solution that included all different employee groups, but it was probably the one that was most beneficial for our largest employee group, which would have been our teachers. Then we had the classification date parity, which is, again, using Dr. Trampy's example, the middle one. I think the middle one in cost, not necessarily the middle one as in a choice of 3, but it was of really those 2 that were long range. They were a cost, but they were given to us, as I believe they may have been given to the county, as here's what you need to do right now to bring folks through that solution. We determined, as the county did, that both from a feasibility perspective, realistically, we needed 3 years to be able to provide that, just from a funding perspective. And so when we chose the solution, we chose the classification date parity because we believed that it was the best one for all non-teachers, for those that are in the classified pay scales, that it would be most beneficial in terms of moving them, I guess, away from the compression and closer to the midpoint. Then I believe, and that was over a 3-year period. The bring to minimum solution was for those that were significantly below the market, and that was all to be done this 1 year, this first year. The range penetration study, we determined that we would do a hybrid version of that for teachers only, so that it would be inclusive of all teachers. And the 4% was so that it wouldn't just hit and affect those at the middle to latter part of the scale positively, but that it would also positively move those at the lower end of the scale, because we were trying to view it from a recruitment and a retention perspective. And then you have, for all employees, we did the minimum 2%. So I think, I find it impossible for our two organizations to do a lockstep, identical, uniform pay proposal or compensation. But I do think generally the approach, I think, is what Ms. Gaines has referred to. We tried to take the similar approach in both how we spanned it out, but also trying to, maximize those solutions for our employees. But the cost over the next 2 years, we are keeping those estimates constant. I believe about $6.8 million is the estimate to implement our compensation plan informed by Evergreen over the next 2 years as it costs this year. And again, thanks to this board's additional funding, we are able to do that this first year. And then, of course, the challenge becomes over the next 2 years.
Understand what you said. The question that might worry me is after 3 years, when we bring them up to a study that was done this year or last year, and we hit 3 years out there, how do we rate now compared to the other school systems, the locality around here? Do you have an idea of what that's? Because I don't believe we should always be catching up. We should hit that mark and then stay equal to the other local surrounding teachers, because there's too much money involved in training a teacher and then having them go either north for a $10,000 more paycheck or something like that. And I just think that's what this board needs to understand through you, and need to know figures that this isn't over in 3 years, guys. We're going to come back over and probably have to do another study. I would think we'd have to. And so we shouldn't be always catching up. We should find a point where we actually get you to the point to where we're compatible with all the, and people don't want to leave for the extra 10,000 or 5,000, whatever it may be, and then try to keep pace with all the other localities around here. And I would love to see something come from the school board to say, okay, here's what we think. I mean, it's hard to see the future, but you can certainly plan for it at an estimate of maybe 4%, 5%, whatever it might take in 3 years to catch up with everybody else. We just can't be playing this game that we're always catching up. And it's all started many, many years ago when we lost teachers and we never did replace them because of the funding that this board provided to the school system. So if you could do that in the future, the board would think about that, please. I think it would help to understand, and this board might understand a little bit more what you're really dealing with. Thank you.
Just one quick comment to that. The estimate of the close to $7 million, that's right now. Again, that can vary by year, but right now that is an estimate that you could ballpark as being what it would cost to do what we're doing on an annual basis. But the other thing, that there's two things. I think that we should be marketable or competitive. I think that the study revealed that we were competitive in many areas. We expect to continue to be competitive once we have fully implemented this pay proposal. But right now, I think there's another concern that's just as worthy. It's not so much that we're concerned about losing staff members, teachers, particularly to other school divisions. We're worried about losing them to the profession. And so I think when we're thinking about compensation, when we're thinking about health insurance, we're thinking about how to motivate, engage, take care of employees that are doing the good work, not only in Spotsylvania, but in this profession in general. And that is a new, I think, consideration, a heightened consideration when we're thinking about it, because I had someone ask me a very good question. How with the health insurance adjustments that you have implemented over the last 2 years, how are you going to take care of employees that are having a lot of their pay increase, even the 4%, wiped out essentially by the health insurance premiums going up for them or their payroll deductions going up. And I said, I'm concerned about them because I don't want to lose them to Spotsylvania County, but I'm not so much concerned that they're going to go somewhere else. I'm concerned that they're going to take their experience, they're going to take their talent, their desire to serve our kids and our communities out of the profession altogether. So that remains, I think, a strong consideration for me in working with our school board, and certainly would welcome your support and ideas for how we can better do that in the future.
Mr. Brake, just a quick question. I mean, and maybe I think this is kind of, a lot of this has confused a lot of people with the Evergreen study from several years ago. And your plan is kind of a hybrid, I think you mentioned. Is that correct? Which you, over 3 years. But the study was over 1 year. I guess that's the point I'm a little confused on, because even the high option, the range penetration parity, was $7 million in 1 year. But now we did almost $7 million this year, and you're requesting the same in the next 2 years. What's the difference, or what's driving? I mean, I've heard some of this stuff, but if we're basing everything on the study brought you to parity within the first year at $7 million. So why are we, I'm not saying why are we doing it next year, but what is the basis for the additional 2 years of $6.8 million?
I think the same reason that the county would want to provide at least a baseline increase for all employees. Because just for us to implement a 2% pay increase across the board for all of our employees, we're at $3.4 million.
So
and that's not implementing any of the
so I want to make sure,
findings.
And I think that may be some of the confused. So we're implementing a hybrid Evergreen study this year at $6.8 million. Next year, we're really off of the Evergreen study at that point. You're going with a 4% increase, but based on just a 2% COLA, it'd be 2.3 plus the rest of the staff. 3.4 I see on your numbers here, but the additional money, which is another 3.4 million, is another hybrid Evergreen, because it's more than what Evergreen said would be required to get us in parity.
Let me make sure I'll just speak to what Evergreen shared with our school board and with this superintendent upon repeated consultation, because there's always a concern, and I shared with our board previously when there was either a question or an urging about a pay study. What a pay study remarkably demonstrates in just about every case is that you need to pay employees more somewhere. And knowing that was going to come, I asked the question, and I think we reiterated this with the board, does that mean that as you implement the study findings, which are about bringing individuals up to a market level, and is not inclusive of all your employees, that should be your pay strategy until you've implemented it? And their answer was absolutely not. This is on top of obviously needing to maintain your annual increases, whatever they may be, that would be a sound compensation strategy. But if you were to implement only the recommendations that they provided and then not provide any other routine pay increases, you are going to find yourself in a less enviable position than you were when you began the study.
So, I mean, I guess I understand where you're coming from. This year, we fully implemented essentially for the most part, the Evergreen study. We're pretty close to it. Well,
remember that all three categories did not include all of our employees.
Well, I'm just going on range penetration parity.
So you have to add, but you have to add them together if you want to
all three
have all of our employees, because we have some employees that didn't qualify for bring the minimum.
Clarify that. In talking to Evergreen, when you look at the three proposals, you had to bring the minimum about 180,000, classification about 4 million, range penetration 7 million. These are totally exclusive of each other. So what that means is that when you look at the 7 million for the range penetration, number one, we're not done in 1 year for two factors. Number one, it does not include the escalation of the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and this number also does not include benefits. So if you look at a benefit factor escalation, you well over into $11 million. So you're not done in 1 year. That $7 million does not include benefits. Whenever you provide a pay raise to employees, you have your VRS, you have your FICA, you have all of those, your group life insurance. So that $7 million is just a flat rate in terms of salary for FY17. No escalation for 18, no escalation for 19.
Exactly, and we never guarantee that. That's basically your COLA we've been providing, the escalation and all that.
But
Right.
also it excludes benefits, and you're looking at about a 40% benefit rate. So you have to keep those factors in mind.
Okay.
Anybody else? Mr. Ross?
I'm probably going to get sent to the principal's office. Hopefully not. So I want to go to slide, I just have a question on slide 14, which is on page 7, the bottom. And going back to the Evergreen study, so I want to compare the two numbers in the other staff. So the one is for a 2% inflation increase. So I guess that would include the non-teacher or the administrators. I'm just assuming that, but is
So
that
what line are you referring to, Mr. Ross?
the other staff?
Okay, other staff, you're basically, if you look at line number 1, which is $1,091,933, that is basically non-teachers, including administrators. If you go down to the next line where you see the star, it says 2% for non-teachers, excluding administrators.
Okay, so I guess the question I have there is excluding administrators, that's the principals,
That's anyone paid on the admin pay scale.
the admin pay scale. So in the Evergreen study, were some of those above market?
Were some of them above market? I would have to go back and look at the report, and I'll be happy to follow up with you.
I believe like the principals were 12% over market. I don't.
Some administrators at different levels were above market.
So in that case, and I'm not against pay raises. I mean, your money is, whatever money is appropriated to the school board is set. But so are you giving a pay raise to those that are already above market up to 12, if it is 12%, or would you like to come back with that?
As we referenced in the budget presentation, we rank very, very low in the entire state of our administrator to student ratio. So we as a county, and our model that we have right now, we have less administrators, but they're doing the work of 2 to 3 administrators in other counties. So for each one, since we're asking them to work longer hours, more time, and do more work, do the work of 1.5 people, it's a benefit for us to pay them a bit above to keep them here.
Okay.
But we could not do that and then we'd have to hire more people if we want to pay on the same level. If we don't have the same model, it's just a different model as of surrounding counties.
But I think there's another point to make too, Mr. Ross, to your question. One of the things that we were requested to do in terms of the school board was to follow the same model or template that the county is using. So is it true that the county had certain individuals that were above market? Did they receive the CPI? The answer is yes. So we're following the same exact model that you all are following. You said basically what you do first, you apply the CPI. Once you apply the CPI, you apply your longevity increase. And if those employees still have not yet been brought to minimum, you would then provide them with the difference. So we have followed the same exact model. We were requested to do so, and we were happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing that I would add to that, and again, something that I asked Evergreen, when you are trying to interpret a study, and I'm sure that the county probably receives some of the same guidance, are you to interpret being above the market as a bad thing or a negative thing? Just like you would interpret being below market to be a negative and you want to bring people up to the market. But if you are above the market by a certain percentage, is that viewed as, well, you need to address that in the negative? And their answer was opposite, that you want to continue to remain ahead where you can competitively. And just to illuminate a little bit what I think Ms. Gramp is sharing is that we want to have the best employees in all areas, and if we're going to ask more and better, and what we do of all of our administrators, the 2% across the board was just something that we were doing with all employees. But in this particular case, when there were some savings found, there was no consideration at this point to look at rewarding anybody any further. But I do think that idea, whether it's administrators or any other employee group, their guidance was not to try to bring others back closer, to the market, just to make it look like there's less, disparity.
Just one last question, because, so in, what was based on the 6.8 million, that does include the 40% benefits, correct?
Yes, sir.
Right, so it's whatever it might be, okay.
Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
And before I make these remarks, I want to make it very clear that the folks that are getting the extra 2% due to the rise in the insurance costs that has happened to these folks, it's well needed. It's definitely well needed. But my issue with the whole situation we have here at hand is the timing. You know, when this school board presented their budget to us, this wasn't even a thought. It wasn't in any presentation, and it was presented to us this way. And we made the decisions that we made on our budget, and our county employees, they've got a cost of living raise of 2.1% for FY19. And they look at their, you know, they look at a school employee, and a lot of folks that work in Spotsylvania County and for the schools, they look at it the same way I do. We both had the word Spotsylvania in front of each employee. The same person, the citizens of Spotsylvania, pay both paychecks. That's who you're answering to if you work for the schools or if you work for the county. You were answering to the citizens. That's who pays the paychecks. That's who's signing it at the bottom line. And I'm looking at slide 8, and I'm sitting here wondering, how do we make it right with the county employee? When I take slide 8 on page 4, I take 2018 and 2019, the cost of living increases for the school employees add up to a 6% increase. Then I add the county employee, and it adds up to a 3.4% increase.
Where do you see that?
2 plus 4 is 6. It's right here. That's
No.
18 and 19, 2 years, over a 2-year period, they've got a 6% cost of living raise. The county employee, you add 1.3 plus 2.1, we got a 3.4% raise for those county employees.
Don't forget about the longevity increase.
That longevity increase is part of the Evergreen study.
Yes.
That's going to get implemented. Now, we're going to,
So last year, you guys got bring to minimum plus longevity. Our employees didn't
Right.
because they were not in that year.
we didn't get a bring to minimum for the county employee. We have the Evergreen study. I don't think your board understands how the implementation of the county study worked. This longevity increase is not a guaranteed 1 to 3% every year. It depends on how many years that you've worked for Spotsylvania County. You get a 1% increase at a 5-year mark, a 10-year mark, and a 15 and 5-year increments. Then you have a 0.5% increase this year if you've been there 3 or 12 years. So it's not a guaranteed increase. If a man had been working for Spotsylvania County for 2 years, he doesn't get anything for that longevity increase. There was no bring to minimum. There was a third. It took what the bring to minimum is this 1/3 of the classification. So your implementation and the county's implementation is completely different. Like I said, your insurance cost has risen. Those people, one plan went up $200 a month. That's a heck of a hit to a middle-class family. I mean, that's groceries for, that's your grocery bill right there. And you basically, it's either, you pick health insurance or you pick your groceries for some of these folks. I don't want these folks to be in that position. Like I said, I'm not against them getting that 4% increase because of the insurance. But now the county employee, I feel, is way behind.
That is critical to this discussion in that we've been working on a health insurance plan for over a 5-year period. And over these last 2 years, the employees have been picking up, 1.8 million each year. So what's happening is because of the cost of the health insurance and that we are passing costs onto the employee with changes in plan design, and now for this current year, picking up co-pays, so that the employee, and I'm not sure how the county is doing it, so let's say, for sake of comparison, that our lowest paid employees get 4%, but when they turn around and contribute to the health insurance plan, they may be losing 2%. If the county staff is getting 2%,
but their health insurance cost is being paid out of a reserve fund, then it's still 2 for 2. To do the real comparison, I think we would have to definitely include the analysis of how the employees being treated, both county and school, through the health insurance plans. We're still into that. We're ready to start a third year, and we're looking at how can we reduce the costs for the employee, but to do so, we had to give an increase in pay to offset the costs that they're going to have to put into that plan. That's the dilemma that we've had. It was in our budget work sessions way back in the beginning, back in January, we had talked about that. And when the opportunity came up that as we had funds allocated through the Evergreen study for one particular group, if we could then give our lowest paying work staff 4% to offset the cost that we were asking of them for the health insurance, it just seemed like a no-brainer. It just made sense. But to get to where you're talking about, I think we would have to do that analysis of, okay, this is the health insurance plan, these are the costs that the employee is picking up with their pay increase, and these are the costs that the school staff is picking up with their pay increase. Net it out and see where it lands. Right. And I think that's the analysis that, to be fair.
And remember, as Anthem told us in our joint schools and supervisors work session, the county increases every year come out of your reserve. We don't have the reserve, so you don't have to pass it along to the employees. We don't have the reserve you guys do, so we have to pass the cost to the employees.
That's not exactly true, because in the
what
past, the
Anthem
county
told us.
Anthem told you wrong, because in the past, we give 1% pay increases to Spotsylvania County employees. I want to say it would have been 2012, 13 range. I may be off on my dates, but that for about a 3-year period, the county. VRS. I'm sorry, it was a retirement. I apologize. But those county employees got that 1%, and it went straight. They didn't get a pay raise by any means. It went straight into the retirement. Okay.
Ours was 14%.
But okay.
But there's going back to, I think that to do a comparison, like you were mentioning, Mr. Marshall, is valid. I think we should do the comparison. But the reason I'm bringing it up is so everyone realizes that for the past 2 years, we have been adjusting the cost, and we've been asking the employees to pick up more and more of that cost. So it's been $1.8 million each year. And the superintendent, as he's working on the budget in September already, be working on next year's budget, I'm sure that we're going to be faced with the same dilemma with how do we cover those costs of health insurance, and at the same time, how do our employees not receive a negative balance check? In other words, they're receiving less the second year than they did the year before. Yep. And it's our lowest paid group that has the greatest difficulty in having a negative balance. So it's a real dilemma. I don't know the solution other than we've been looking at. The solution is to restructure our plan design. And for this next year, one of the things we looked at in order to reduce the premiums was to work with increase in copays. That garnered some savings so that it wouldn't hit the employees as hard. And we're going to have to continue to do that. Health savings account is another, and we're working with Blue Cross and the same consultant that we have for both organizations, looking at how can we best structure that. Is it an HMO? What are the options? And we're looking at that because we are going to have to find ways that we can save, because we cannot live with escalating costs in that area. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board.
Mr. Braswell.
Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. First, I want to thank the Board of Supervisors again for their funding of our budget. All of our employees are all of our employees, and I understand Mr. Marshall's concern, but as you and I have talked before, there's some perceptual issues that if we look at just the variables of cost of living, we don't get an opportunity to tell the true story. I'm very proud of our board in the fact that we were very forward-leaning in taking on the challenge of containing health insurance costs. And as we had mentioned before, over the past couple years, some of us had to deal with the explanation to our employees that we were going to change their health insurance plans, and quite a few of them were disgruntled as a result of it. And as a result of doing that, it saved us $3.6 million in savings. And I made mention that's 3 pennies on the real estate tax. And that's a substantial increase in capacity just from the school board in order to do all the other funding that's required. Our school board, when we look back at some of the other cost-saving functions that we've done studies, I mean not studies, but we've done savings where we've had reduction in force, if you will, where we asked, where we had early outs to provide capacity inside of our budget. So I think as a school board, and the perception that we want to make sure that the public understands is that we take the tax dollars that we're given very seriously, and that we have every intention of maximizing them for the benefit of the county, not just the school system. And the evidence speaks for itself, and you could see the savings from the health insurance and also from some of the other measures that we've taken. The thing that we were looking at is that we had some short-term goals that we had to meet in terms of health insurance, but we also knew that we needed to modernize our health insurance plans so that they were also beneficial for our employees. And I hate to say it, but when you have older employees, they're not really happy about changing their plans. But we had to be able to present to them opportunities to maximize health savings plans and HMOs like Dr. Meyer had mentioned, so that it's going to be in the long run beneficial to the school division and the county as a whole. And on our joint meeting, and I am impressed with the fact that Mr. Trampy made mention that we don't do health insurance right at the federal level. We don't do health insurance right at the state level. So let's try to do health insurance right at the local level. And I agree with him fully, and I commended him for saying it in that way, because that is a major cost driver. And we all need to be working in partnership so that we can contain those costs. It doesn't do us any good to look at this outside of a way in where we start educating our county employees and school employees to the inevitability of the fact that we need to have innovative health insurance products that are going to be lower cost but much more efficient. So I want to thank our school board for having the political courage to take the heat on that. And I think that our county employees should understand that school employees are paying a price because of some of the changes that we're making. And quite frankly, they're not happy about it. And we're just going to have to stand in the gap and say that, we understand and we're trying to do the very best we can, not only for our school employees, but also for the county. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair.
Just a caveat on that, we still have 2 years left of our 5-year health insurance plan that we've been changing a little bit each year, because changing everything at one time was not going to be accepted by our employees. So a little bit of change each year is garnering a little bit of savings each time, and then we'll be able to get to our maximum, which after the joint meeting, it sounded like the county is going to start looking at some of the options that we've been implementing over the last 3 years. So hopefully then we can, again, be on the same path.
Mr. Skinner?
Mr. Chairman, is there any level, like the State Education Association, whatever it is, or even the General Assembly, is there some way, since probably the school teachers, I believe, are probably underpaid just basically for the value of what they do every day. Spend more time with their kids than parents do with their own children. And that's the fact of the nature, okay? And my point is, it would seem to me, at least maybe the state of Virginia would have some type of insurance that they could form under the state education. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I know all these terms of what they go. But it would seem to me that there's quite a few schools in Virginia. And can we come up with something from the state of the assembly that would actually help you out?
It might actually be a better answer for Ms. Gaines because there is a state plan, but we have chosen to go self-funded. So Mrs. Gaines, I'm going to let you take that.
Absolutely, Mr. Skinner. There was actually a bill out, I want to say about the last year and a half, and it did come to the General Assembly whereby they were looking to have a state plan. So Spotsylvania, many other school districts, we were required to give them our census data, give them our premium data, our plan design data, and after everything had been analyzed, it was determined that it was more cost effective for us to keep our current plan. So they have tried that, and it was not successful.
Okay, so it wasn't successful. What would make it successful? That's what I'm saying. So if the General Assembly has offered, and has it been negotiated? Has it gone back to the General Assembly? Is it just, well, we find it easier to do it here? So it's, well, I know it's not easy. If it was, we wouldn't be here talking about this probably, to be honest with you. But I don't believe that after 1 year or whatever you decide, you know, personally, I'd go back to the assembly and say, this is what we need to make it effective. And let the state help out a little bit more than what they do. And I'm not sure exactly how much the state helps out, but that's what they're there for.
But the main issue with that, Mr. Skinner, is after all they did, all that work for about a year and a half, they did not have enough school districts that were interested in the program. Therefore, it failed. So you can go back again, but they're not interested because it's going to cost them more to have a lower plan design, therefore it wasn't cost effective.
I understand what you're saying. Sure. I understand what you're saying, but okay, what would they have to do to make it more effective for you guys to go with the state plan? What would the state have to provide? I mean, I can understand after a year and a half, they didn't offer enough to cover it. So that's why it was more effective for you to stay with your plan. Does it end there? I don't think so. I think I would continue on to say, okay, let's work with the state as far as how is this going to be more effective for us to go with you? What does the General Assembly have to approve, okay, to bring it down to the point where it is more effective to go with the state?
What she's saying is the rates were not competitive. So all the school divisions who had better rates, they're not going to choose to pay more to go on the state plan.
But why were the states more? I
mean, that would be up
to
to an insurance adjuster, not
the General Assembly. But that's what the state
Assembly.
needs to do, to come in and say, wait a second, you're accepting a fact that the state gives you a premium, your premium's lower, you're very smart in keeping with the lower premium. But let's go back to the state and say, in order for us to go with your plan, here's what you've got to get either from the insurance companies or what, and give it a shot. All they can say is no, and you're not going to be any worse than you are today, guys. I just wouldn't stop. I'd keep continuing looking at it if I would.
But one of the things we can't do, Mr. Skinner, it's a pooled fund. So therefore, if you don't have enough schools that are interested in participating, you're not going to get the premium levels that you desire. So with that being said, all the schools were required to provide this information based on the input that was provided. They're not going to get the rates that they currently have. So it's not going to be successful. We tried it, and we worked hard at it.
I understand what you're saying. And the reason that you didn't have enough people interested in it was because you all had better plans out there than the state provided. Basically, is what I understand. You agree?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was more
so the point
lower
is,
expense.
okay, so the point is, why can't you take it? I'm not saying change, but go back to the state and give them a plan. Say, hey, here's what we need. This is what all the schools need in Virginia. Let the General Assembly, let the state put in more money for insurance for teachers and for staff and stuff of that nature.
They don't put any money in, but Mr. Braswell could answer your plan question.
Well, you know what? The state takes a lot of taxes from every individual, and some of those taxes should be put into education, not only for educating our students, but also providing health benefits for our teachers.
Mr. Skinner, I agree with you, but we all know the reality is that's not going to happen. So what we decided to do is lean forward on this and start educating our employee base that they needed to change the platform from the standard PPO plan to more innovative plans. And I mentioned the health savings accounts because they're not understood by a lot of people, but they don't understand the great value that they provide in the future. For example, if I have a health savings account, I'm going to pay less in terms of premium. There's premium that I can contribute to the plan that I will be able to maintain control over that premium in later years. On the standard PPO plan, I pay my premium. After that year's up, I lose control over the premium that I paid. But if I have a health savings account, I get to keep that premium as the employee. And if I never use it, when I get ready to retire, I still have control over that premium, and now I can buy a Medicare supplement plan when I'm in retirement, or I can use it for a long-term care insurance policy when I'm in that particular time. So I'd actually like to get us away from the old paradigm of just PPO plans. I think it's beneficial not only in the short term and the long term in terms of costs, but it's also beneficial to our employees once they're educated and understand the value that they have by going to an HSA as opposed to a standard PPO plan.
Anybody else? Mr. Marshall?
Just trying to get some understanding here on the Evergreen implementation on your side. Like I said earlier, the county side, as far as to bring the minimum, was the 1/3 classification through over a 3-year period. If you're bringing everyone to minimum in 2019, where do you get your 1/3 classification number from?
Okay, sure. A very good question. So when you look at our study, bring the minimum was basically about $180,000 before benefits, before escalation for 18 and 19. So where did we get our classification? What we basically did was to look at the classification study for non-teachers only, about 594 individuals. When you look at that number, then you divide it by 3. After those individuals have been brought to minimum, that's the remaining amount. Okay. Does that make sense? We did.
Like I say, it's too. Yeah, I know. It's just it's. I know we're trying to implement this study at the same pace and same rate, but I feel that we're way off on how we've done it. And I think we've got some different figures. I really think the Evergreen study, we may have been spinning our wheels and wasting some time with this thing. I think it was something we probably could have sat down and worked it out on our own.
Well, throughout all of the budget season, since I've been on the board, we're always brought with an Excel chart of all the comparing salaries from the counties surrounding us. And we would bring that to the supervisors each year, and we would explain that we were trailing. And like, it wasn't our idea to do the Evergreen study. we were asked to go jointly into the county, and it showed, especially from the teachers' end, that our scales were very competitive, but our teachers, because of the years of not being on frozen steps, since they weren't getting paid on the step that they should be on, our teachers were just behind. Our scales were great, but our teachers weren't on the place on the scales where they should have been. But as Ms. Gaines said, all of our employees aren't teachers, so then we had to look at the classification for the other employees. So we have different employees and different options. So because of that, it can't be completely exactly like the county. We also have different salary lengths or contract lengths, so that makes the scales even harder to interpret.
I'd like to just ask if the information that we provided answered the question about what's the revenue number and what's an expenditure number when it's dealing with enrollment and ADM. Did we answer that question? Because because, when you're making a comparison, it's apples and oranges, and somebody threw a banana peel in the middle of it. So, when we're dealing with ADM, that's a revenue number. That's a March 31st figure that gets tracked, and it's based on.
It's slide
intent.
3, Mr. McLaughlin.
So I just want to make sure, because that is kind of fundamental to understanding what we are doing when we are tracking different figures. Whereas the enrollment that we do is the September 30th enrollment, and that is really, one, it tells the state what's happening across the Commonwealth, as far as who's walking in the door, and we are tracking that, but that becomes more of an expenditure figure, and realizing that when we are dealing with enrollment numbers, we also have to keep track of different groups within that one, like the preschool and the special ed. All those we have to, special ed is December 1st count. And the preschool group, sometimes they're not considered as K-12 because they're preschool, they're pre-K-12. We have groups of those, state and a federal program. So that enrollment figure is totally different than a revenue number. And we have to keep that in mind, because it does make a difference.
So maybe you could probably help a little bit, because I was looking at the slides earlier, and was it slide 6, and it does ADM trends, and that's your average across the year? Is that what that ADM is?
Okay, so let me speak to that.
ADM is over a period of time. Average membership it's on slide 3. Average membership from first day of school through March 30th, and it excludes pre-K students.
So it's the average over the school year.
That's correct, sir, over
And
the
then
number of
student enrollment
days.
is as of
So
September 30th.
Is as of, September 30th, a point in time. That's your main difference, a point in time.
So what do we budget to?
Okay, so what we budget to both, but for your operating budget, when you're looking at monies that you're gonna get from the state, you're gonna use your ADM. And I will tell you for emphatically, all CFOs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they're gonna be very conservative with that ADM number. Because if you overstate that number and those students don't come in, you're gonna be looking at maybe a mid-year freeze, things of that nature. So you use it for revenue on ADM. For your student enrollment, you do use that when you're trying to fund your non-compensation school-based allocations, because you want to give a certain dollar amount for every student that's in that classroom. For your CPI, CPI, you also use your student enrollment in terms of capacity and things of that nature.
So why is one excluded and the other one does not?
Okay, so
and how many are there?
Okay, yes, sir. The formula is driven by the Virginia Department of Education. According to their ADM formula, they have excluded pre-K. Pre-K, you're looking at your special needs students. You're also looking at your Head Start students and your VPI, because those are funded in a different formula. Mm-hmm. So that's why they are excluded, and your student enrollment number will always be higher than your ADM. It's about 400.
So about 400 is
yes, sir, in terms of your pre-K.
All right. So when you bring the budget forward to the board, which numbers are you using?
We're going to use your ADM for projecting your state revenue.
Okay.
Yes, sir. For revenue.
And so how many are we projecting in 19 then? I guess that was part of the confusion.
Okay, yes, sir. So in 19, keep in mind too, this data is updated as you get new information. So initially when we came in, we were basically looking at 23,175. But however, once we got through the budget season, we were able to see that we did pick up a few more students. So for FY19, we're budgeting at 23,186. And that's
11.
the number that you see on page 4, slide 4, page 2.
So 11 additional students, I guess.
Yes, sir. And that's going to cover our 57,000 in order to update our proposal.
For our revenue, for our ADM, for our enrollment projection is increased far more than 7 students, if you look.
To answer your question in terms of the numbers that we brought to you on the state revenue side, we were looking at the 23,186 is what the school board approved when they adopted their budget on April the 16th.
And that's what was presented to us on the Thursday
for
before.
Revenue, not for enrollment.
So for ADM,
for ADM,
revenue,
when
what
we
was
presented
presented
to
on
you
that Thursday?
That Thursday, sir, it was 23,175. As we scrubbed the numbers more that weekend, we were working with the IT department. We did increase it by 11 to bring the number to 23,186.
Okay, thanks.
So what happens with that revenue number is as of March 31st, that's the that is the day, and that number is what's used for the state monies that's coming in. Now, what's interesting is that figure is used, and usually the state has already finished its budget, and the school division will find out if, as they approve the budget, and remember they're doing the biennial budget, but they also take care of the current budget. They will make adjustments, and they usually work with the sales tax and the state aid and basic aid. Those two numbers get revised. What's kind of difficult right now is, for finance staff, they can't really get a good handle on where are we going to be other than where they are. Right now, there's no way to know, whether, are we going to be short or are we going to be over? If we're going to be short in revenue, means all of a sudden something drastic is going to have to happen. And we hope that in finance, they've estimated conservatively so that any monies that come in would just fall to our carryover and not, have to be counted on to make ends meet. And so that revenue number is critical. Every student means about $5,000, roughly. If you don't have that student, if you lose that student, $5,000 per. Now, what's interesting, when you look at enrollment as an expenditure, that's not true. It's only calculation. It's really, if you could have additional student, if that student is a special ed student, needs a special ed bus, a special ed aide, a special teacher, and then you've got the full cost of that particular, which is cost. But you could add a student to a classroom and not increase cost at all. That's possible. But that's not true with revenue. For every student on ADM, it's money. And it goes with that child. If you don't have the child, you lose the money. And that's the biggest difference. And I'm glad the question was asked because some people have difficulty. They think the enrollment and ADM are the same. They are not the same, just like revenue is not the same as expenditure. They are totally different, totally separate. And it has to, you have to get your head wrapped around that to realize the impact when you're doing the budget. Having worked it so many years, I knew the impact. But I also know the impact on finance staff when they know that we still don't have a state budget, so you can't lock in to know where you are this year definitively. There's no reason for me to ask a question because finance staff can't even answer it. Until the House and the Senate and the General Assembly finishes their work, we won't know this year how we stand.
Just one more to follow up with, just because of the deltas between the two. So there's roughly 710 students between the average of the ADM and then the 1 October projection, 710 kids, and you said roughly 400 are pre-K. So there's 300, you'll anticipate dropping 300 kids over the... So what, on these...
As you said, you try to underestimate ADM in case you're off. Like I said,
so, and there's a good question. So on 17, 18, and 19, what were the end, how close were we to the actuals to the end of the school? On March 31st, did we have 23,592 and 17? You know what I'm saying? Are we closer to the average or are we closer to the estimate on 1 October?
I'm going to say for the last 3 years, because we were actually seeing a downturn in terms of the projections that we were doing, we finally broke the trend, and now you see how we're going up. So I would say we're probably closer maybe to the average, but for the most part, you have to be very conservative. Point in case, if you look at my actual number for FY17 for ADM, you'll see how I had 23,076. Then if you look at my number for FY18, I had 23,184. So I did see an increase there of 108.
Slide 4.
Yes, he's looking at the same slide. So when you look there, you see an increase of 108. So we had to be conservative in our projections. But now you can see over a 2-year period, I've gone from 23,076 to 23,186. So we're starting to see an upward trend. Again, we have to be conservative.
I find that for people that are not in the school setting to understand the difference here, I just found an analogy a couple years ago that worked for me, and it was the difference between your annual percentage rate and interest rate. We all know those are two completely different numbers and they have different definitions. So if you're more used to handling those terms, people are used to paying those, but they have completely different definitions and they come up with a different thing and they're not used interchangeably. So you can't use ADM and student enrollment interchangeably. They stand for different things, just like APR and interest rate do.
And if I may, just again to, we try to punctuate this throughout the budget season, but the very next slide, that is slide 5, just as a reminder, and it really goes to where the majority of the positions that we recommended are focused on. So if we, and I think I've maybe shared this with individual board members before, but if our ADM didn't go up, our enrollment didn't go up. But you just look at slide 5, you can see that our needs, in some cases, substantially increased. And so I think that's still an important context when considering the positions that we are looking to add and our needs in the future.
Anybody else? Mr. Yakubowski, sorry.
Thanks. A couple of questions I came up with. One, and thank you for coming to the special meeting. And I think it's good to have this dialogue and discussion. One of the things I keep hearing is about the out-of-county students and how it's costing the county so much money. And if we were just to stop that, we would save a hefty amount of money. Can you explain that so that we can better understand?
Sure. Okay, so if you look at where we are for this particular school year, we were looking at 225 out-of-county students. Based on what has been shared previously, for each one of those students, we do receive $5,000 from the state. So in essence, you're looking at $1.1 million. So the main point is the gain revenue is much greater than what the savings would be if these 225 students were told that they could no longer attend Spotsylvania County schools. Because whatever expenses that you will incur, those are incremental increases or expenses. Just because you add a student, that does not mean you now have to add a teacher. But it is very true, for every student, we receive $5,000.
Quick follow-up, because I've heard this question come up before, and I guess it partly goes back to, I understand what you're saying, but the per capita per student's in the 11,000, 11,500, whatever it may be. So, but if you didn't have those 225 students, you would have a savings across the county. You wouldn't gain that from the state, but there's still a cost to 225 students.
I'm going to say it's a minimal cost, yes, but that cost that you incur, it's going to be much less than what your revenue would have been coming from the state. So it's more advantageous to have those 225 students in your school system.
So just
from a CFO's perspective.
Yeah. So now be careful with that, because now you said if I added 225 students, it's a minimal cost impact. So the growth in the student population over the last couple of years is really a relatively small growth. Actually, we're probably saving money, right? Because we're getting the $6,000 per student from the state with a very minimal impact to overall infrastructure, student, teacher count. Is that correct?
As we explain every year, it's the student with disabilities trend that is really our budget driver.
Correct. So I'm not going to say that's totally correct, because if you add a student into a particular school, you already have that classroom of 22 students. There's room on the bus. The teacher's already there. So you're not looking at significant expenses when you're looking at these 225.
They all lived in the same neighborhood and were in the same grade and all rode the same school bus, then that would be a big impact, but spread over 30 campuses.
But I'm also going to add, if their parent works in the division, the parent is taking them and transporting them to the school. So they're really not even using transportation, because the parent is taking them to school because they're bringing them in from a different division. And then also, that's staff members. And if they are teachers, then we don't have to go find another teacher if they left the division because they could not bring their children to school. So it's a win-win for our students and because of the teacher as well.
And if I can continue on, one of the other things that I wanted to bring up too was that when the county did our evergreen pay compensation study and implementation, I will use the numbers that staff has given me. I asked the question basically. We did it 1 year earlier, and in the county administrator's budget, there was an estimate of what that cost would be. And that was roughly 1.7 million. During the budget process, this board added almost 400,000 to that. Then the actual cost was actually another 300,000 higher. So you're looking at roughly $700,000 more than was originally estimated. And, you know, I've been hesitating at what to say here because I see the friendliness of this whole situation, but the reason that we got here, I think we really need to discuss. And I will tell you that these inferences that are made and these questions that are raised as to found money. And I just want to lay it out there because I know the newspaper did a story, and I know people will not listen to this entire discussion. They just won't. And I'm not going to repeat this entire discussion to them either. So I think that we really need to just lay it out for them. Did you find $700,000 in new money that you were then able to put into your budget?
Absolutely not, sir.
So that money that you actually had that was in the budget that you used for another purpose was saved because you were able to scrub your budget from an estimate, kind of like we did. But your estimate went down, ours went up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's no pots of money sitting out there, no coins in the couch, and that's a heck of a lot of coins in the couch to actually get to that point. So I really think that that's important that the public understands how this happened. It was an estimate, and then when the numbers were scrubbed, your estimates actually went down. And on the county side, ours went up, and that is not an indictment of bad number projection, and I know that's not even a word, but I just made it a word. So, but what it shows is that budgets are very fluid things that move as we go along the process. And I think that it is important that the public understands that not only are our numbers looked at by lots of people and lots of very smart people that are really good at math, as one of our staff people has stated before, which I hope that she is because she's part of the budget team. But also we're audited yearly. We sit here and we listen to an audit, and we, for the most part, pass with very high recommendations from our outside auditor, who, you know, does this and is a professional. So it's not an internal thing that we do and we just, you know, pass ourselves. We actually have somebody that comes outside and looks. And so I think those things are important because the public perception needs to be that we are doing a very good job of looking out for taxpayer dollars. We can disagree about how we spend them and how we raise them. I mean, those are perfectly good and legitimate arguments to have. But I think the ones that are not are the indictments of ways that our budget process goes, leading to conclusions that simply just don't hold water. And so I want to thank you all for being as frank and open, and the superintendent making phone calls and taking time, because every time I go to any school function, the superintendent is there. So unless you have a twin, you're spending an awful lot of time engaged in the process, and I appreciate that. And then to take the time out to make the phone calls, and then my school board member and other school board members who I run into and talk to are always open and forthright, and any questions that you want to know. Now, I will say my school board member being a health insurance guy, no offense against the insurance industry, but it's boring. No offense. But I think that it is as transparent, not that we're perfect, but we're always striving for perfection. And I think that that's a good place to be. So thank you for everything.
To respond to that comment, yes, our board was thrilled that our staff was able to discover that there was a difference between the estimate and the actual implementation, and we were able to give that to our employees to help with the health insurance adjustment. We were just able to reallocate money. The total number didn't change except for by the money that the 97 is what I was going to say. Oh, 57. See, I knew I was wrong, 90. 57,000 was the only difference in the total number. So there was never any difference in the total. So I'm not quite sure how that got misinterpreted. That number didn't change. And if you, like I said, any of those three presentations, there was never an additional number of that much money. So I'm not quite sure how that got misinterpreted, but I gave our staff and our board was very happy to have discovered that. And as Mr. Yakubowski said, in the first year of implementation on the county side, you guys had a difference from budget, and it wasn't questioned. So I was just curious as to how it was questioned on our side, but we were happy to be able to do that and pass that on to our employees. So.
Madam Chair, too, I'm glad you made that comment, and I like to say we understand that we all have a responsibility, we have a job to do, and I think for the school division, at this particular time of year, we focus on testing because it validates what we do. We focus on scholarship and achievement because we want to celebrate the great work that our students are doing in our school system and in our community. And you all will have an opportunity to see next week graduation, which is the pinnacle of why we spend the dollars in the first place. So we look forward to you coming to the graduation and to celebrate with us what it's really all about, seeing our young people matriculate into life and start their careers either in the military, start their careers in higher education, or start their careers in the workforce. Whatever they decide to do, it's why we spent the money in the first place. And I thank each one of you for investing in our school division so that we can continue to be the very best school division in this state. And I'm not boring.
Mr. Skinner.
Hey, that last question I have is this to you. So you mentioned that every student that comes with their parent who's a teacher, you mentioned the figure 5,000. Is that the figure, and does it come because it's part of the ADM?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up with something. And again, a lot of people seem to get offended or upset when we challenge the numbers, but that's our job. All of our jobs is to challenge every penny spent. And I will say that we've never actually said don't spend money, on a particular thing. I mean, this is a good budget this year. And we're getting turf fields too, right? I mean, this is a lot of good stuff that's going to occur in this budget. And I guess the biggest problem is if this presentation would have been given to us prior to our setting the tax rate on Thursday, a lot of these questions may not have came up because, we went till 11 o'clock at night, but, based on what superintendent suggested at that point, 4% for teachers, 2% for everybody else based on the number that was allocated. And the whole issue came up is that there was a change. Same amount of money, but how you're going to spend the money came up on that following Monday. And that's what drove the questions. And that's what it seemed like found money, because if that was presented on that Thursday, the board may have came up to a different conclusion. They may have not gone all the way to the $4.5 million additional money this year. I don't know. But again, it was about timing, and I think something was suggested earlier, is that we didn't know. We didn't tell you not to spend it or how to spend it, but it was presented to us on that board that it was going to be 4% and 2%, because that does make a difference to the county employees as well, because we may have made different plans, or there may have been a different way to present the overall budget. But, you know, again, before everybody gets all upset, it's our job to challenge, okay? And if, you shouldn't be offended by that. You should be, it's great, it should be good. As you're going and we're challenging each other, we should challenge all the time, because this is not our money, it's not the school's money, it's not the Butte County's money, it's the taxpayers' money. And it's our job to make sure that every penny is spent wisely. And if we challenge you, it's nothing personal, it's our job. So that's what this is about. And I think having these meetings more often is better, so these facts come out earlier, so we don't have these issues in the future. So.
Get this green light on. Anybody have any other comments?
If I may, because I want to make sure that I do recall on that Thursday evening, and I apologize to this board that I was not able to come to the first meeting that I was requested to attend. But that evening, I did try to answer any pending questions that would have any bearing on the decisions that were made that evening, but I answered those questions based on my convictions that what we were presenting in its totality was needed, and I still believe that. But let me make sure that it's clear. I will take, as the superintendent, all responsibility for any changes that I recommend to this school board in terms of the budget, both now and in the future. And if what we need to do is to try to telegraph certain changes in advance of the board approving them for understanding, then I think that's a process to explore as to what that looks like, because there was never any intention to mislead anybody with what we ultimately did. But not only would I want to do this again, I'm just going to, in all candidness, if we can find another way to provide more to our employees tomorrow, I'll do it. And I'll recommend it to the board. And if we can find a way to not put such an insurance burden on our employees, I'm going to recommend it. And I would want to maximize the investment that the taxpayers are making into our schools so that they can indeed be excellent. And I think putting it towards what we're putting towards gives us an opportunity to do that. But I know that in terms of the fluidity that Dr. Meyer was talking about, there could be additional changes. We're always making adjustments, and I'll use probably a poor example of a game plan in sports. You have a game plan, but all during the year, the coaches have to make adjustments in that game plan based on, what's happening in the game. And in the owner's box, which is the school board, we have to make many decisions and inform the board. But I really did believe that what we recommended that Monday was something that had come at the urging of the school board as well as our own employees. And so sometimes I sit at tables where somebody needs to do is just say they're sorry, and doesn't matter who's to blame, but I'm sorry if I could have provided information to this board that would not have caused any potential divisions, misunderstandings. And so we'll continue to try to maintain and enhance that level of communication moving forward.
Ms. Shelley.
Thank you. And Dr. Baker, you gave it to the school board, and it was our decision to accept it, and we had a 7-0 vote. So thank you for taking it, but we were the ones who accepted it. And what I'm wondering is, with that, Mr. McLaughlin, if what you're saying is, would there had been a change had we said we were going to give everybody the 4%, would you have said no? That's what I'm wondering. Is what you're saying is, had you known, there might have been some other changes, there may have been something different. So I'm hoping that that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing something different, that you would not have accepted, given us the amount that you gave us, because we were giving everybody 4%.
I voted against the budget, and it was because of I thought you should have hired not 60 employees this year. And again, it wasn't that, and again, we've never gone back and told the school board how to spend the money once it's been allocated. And all I asked is that it was presented, and I get it. But Thursday and 3 days later, it changed. It went from 4% for everybody, which That's great that you can do that, and I have no problem with that. But I would have liked to have had that information on Thursday, because it could have made a difference on other board members on how they voted on the budget and whether or not they're raising taxes anyway. Maybe they would raise the taxes to give the county employees 4% as well. That's what the timing came in, because it wasn't fair to the rest of the county employees that now got the 2% this year, vice 4% like the schools. And what we want to do, because there are similar jobs between school employees, county employees, whether you're buildings and grounds or maintenance on buildings, that's a very similar job. And it's unfortunate we gave the county employee a lower pay raise than the schools. And that's what it's about. It's whatever the purpose behind it, you guys allocate the money you want, but I wish we'd have had the data earlier. And I understand that you didn't solve it or didn't have all the information until that Monday before the meeting. That's what I was told, and okay. But next year, I guess the goal would be to have it earlier. So prior to the board setting the budget and setting the tax rate, we have all the facts and we understand how to go forward.
Okay. Well, as a reminder, what we had talked about as well with your maintenance employees and our maintenance employees getting a different percentage increase. Our maintenance employees are getting a higher increase for health insurance. And then I just wanted to mention, you said you had voted against our budget because we were hiring 60 people, but yet your budget, this is just based on last year's budget, 3,095 employees, and we were hiring 60 people, which is only a 1.9% increase. Yet you guys were hired a net of 35, which was an increase of over 3%.
So I don't want to get into
I'm just
I don't
saying
wanna, I
that
understand.
we would, our increase is due to the necessary, our needs, the health, our special education population, and the mental health needs that our students
And I wasn't
are
arguing
requiring.
against hiring 120. I suggested hiring them over 4 years, vice 3. And I should correct myself. I voted against the tax increase because that's what drove the tax increase, was hiring additional, increasing the school's budget. I think the $3 million is enough, and I think I don't know that there's much more to discuss. It is what it is.
I just have a point of clarification that the only change, the extra 2% was given to 458 employees. It wasn't it was only those 458 that were affected out of 3,500. So it wasn't a blanket increase. It was just those select people. Mr. Braswell.
Mr. McLaughlin, to say that the reason that the taxes were increased was because of the school budget, I think is a little disingenuous. We just mentioned that our school division saved basically 3 pennies on the tax dollar over the past couple years in reoccurring costs. And we've done other things to build capacity. And I made mention in a newspaper article that I really find that to be unfair, that whenever there's a tax increase, it always is because of the school division. And I just think that's wrong. I think it's unfair. I think we've shown that we have leaned forward and made some pretty courageous decisions, some pretty tough political decisions, and some decisions that our employees aren't really too happy about, to save that kind of money on the tax rate. So to say that you would have had a lower tax rate if this information would have been disclosed earlier, it can be flipped and said that if we didn't do what we were supposed to do, if we didn't take the challenge of tackling health insurance, we could be paying 3 pennies higher on the tax rate. And what bothers me is we've almost lost the definition of what conservative is. In my opinion, we've gotten ourselves back into these tribal trenches where you got people saying taxes should be this and that's only this, and they stay in that tribal trench, and other people saying we should raise taxes and they're in a tribal trench, and all we do is mow each other down with machine guns, trying to say who's not raising taxes or who's responsible for raising taxes. The school division's on your team. We are part of the county, and we've done our part, and the evidence speaks for itself. So you can't draw the conclusion that if it weren't for this little piece of information, that you guys would have kept tax rates even lower. We've done our part to keep tax rates down. And to say that we didn't, I think is very disingenuous.
Ms. Shelley.
And I'm going to caveat on Mr. Braswell's statements about the tax increase, is the county had, this is from the county's website, the fact sheet, that the county had an increase of $27.9 million from 18 to 19. The school's local transfer was $4.75 million, which is an additional above of what last year, the year before. So that's only 17% of the full revenue increase of the county. So there's an 83% of the county's increase in the budget was not the schools. So to say that the schools are the reason for the tax increase is, as I'm going to use Mr. Braswell's term, disingenuous, because it is 17% versus the county everything else for the county was 83%. Those are just numbers these are straight from the county's website.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Thank you. LaShawn, if I might, just so that we can get back to the point, at least clear in my head, is that the amount of money it took to do the pay increases on your side was actually less than you estimated. So we gave you a chunk of money. You actually used that even wiser.
Correct.
To do something more than. So that would not have affected, and I'll speak for myself, my vote, because the transfer that went to the schools was a complete transfer, which I got to say, according to the newspaper, and we know how that they can get it wrong occasionally, is Stafford actually, local transfer is 126 million, and we're 128 million. And so I think that putting the schools in a priority of revenues being transferred over is where I was coming from. Whether or not you were able to do that was not the linchpin in my vote whatsoever, because I knew that you as an elected body and your people would come up with the best way to use that estimate. And like I said, our estimate was $700,000 under, and yet we still did it with hardly any. I remember Mr. Benton had brought up a lot of questions, but that right there is $700,000. But that was never categorized as found money on the county side. We did it. And that is the thing that is frustrating in my point of view, is that we are the ones that bring in the revenue, and then we disperse the revenue to the departments. And for this, your department, okay, no offense, a very large one. But when it comes to our county employees, we went right ahead and did what we thought was right according to the Evergreen study. And we funded it. There was no squabbling. There was no, hey, well, we should reduce it, because it went up $700,000. But then when it comes to the school side, the hard work that you all did to go through every single person and to look and to find those numbers and to be as accurate as you possibly could, then is categorized as somehow mismanagement, which I completely reject. And I think that that is the nexus of this whole discussion. There has nothing to do with that whatsoever. The money that was transferred was used in the best possible way by the school system, period.
And to add to that, Mr. Yakubowski, when you look at the meeting on April the 12th, that information was not brought to you because staff had not fully completed its analysis. That night, while in the meeting, we were still working on the analysis. We worked over the weekend, and we just have to be very clear that we don't have a double standard. We worked very hard to bring to our board on our meeting, April 16th, the best numbers possible. And if you all added $700,000 afterwards, then we all have to be held to the same standard.
Anybody else have any comments? I just stayed quiet for a little bit. I just got to make some general comments. I don't have a problem with I guess it came out with $400,000 that you bad wording, found, came up on, reallocated, thank you. I don't have any issues with that. But it's like with everything else, both entities. We're scrutinized by everybody in the world. Well, somebody out there is going to take my words and just totally obliterate them, what the true meaning is behind them. But we're scrutinized enough by many individuals, groups, you name it. And, the only thing that I think it comes down, again, to communication between both boards, and, Mr. Taylor and Dr. Baker, y'all are at the forefront. Y'all see what goes on every single day. We don't always see that. We're getting bits and pieces here and there. Each of us know, maybe a little bit more than others on certain areas. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, I would have just appreciated a quick, and the county does the same thing. So we fail to communicate with information to y'all too. So it goes both ways. So I'm not pointing fingers, but I think we could have solved a lot with just a quick email to Mr. Taylor who could put it out to us, or a phone call to Mr. Taylor. However, maybe y'all need to get the bat phones. Each of you can have the red phone, and when one calls the other, to pick up, and that's something that you need to, just some communication between the all two that you can either choose to share or not share with your individual boards. Well, I don't always watch it. I'm sorry. I try to keep up with it as much as I can, but I don't know how much of you watch of ours. Every single, you watch every single show of ours, because it's a show sometimes. If you can't, I don't watch every single one of yours. I gotta admit it. I'll be the first one to say I don't watch your show every single time you have it on. Well, a lot of folks think we're both shows. So anyway, and I hope you knew what I'm not trying to be ingenuous or. Well, I understand, but again, it just a quick email, phone call on.
You also have to remember, we make changes though every month. Every month we have to respond to something, and we're always transferring money. This is not a new thing for us, and this dollar value is pretty minuscule. There's always places that we have to move because we do the budgets, our estimates.
But you got to understand, the ones out there scrutinizing us are going, 400,000 turns out to be 800,000. 800,000 turns out to be several million. Several million is a billion. It's, when I first heard it was 800,000. Schools have found 800,000. And I try to take each, when people reach out to me and try to give me information, I try to take each bit with a grain of salt, and until I hear from the, again, I will use the horse's mouth. I don't have, right, and I do. But I think, like I say, a quick phone call with Mr. Taylor could have put out to us just a FYI. I think that would have solved a lot, because we wouldn't probably even have this. Well, I hope we'd still have the meeting and do some quarterly meetings like what I suggested, but because I think the communicate, because I learned, in Ms. Gramp's analogy with the that she gave as far as the comparison with the ADM and the other figures, that's it's educating me, and the more knowledge I can gain of what goes on in your area of expertise, even as small as it is, as far as what I get out of it, the more understanding I have, the better I think we can all get along and understand the information that's being relayed on a yearly basis. Because we go through these budgets every year. At the end of the day, we approve the budget, and then you don't hear anything about anything or go over any of the information till next budget cycle starts. So, when you don't use it, you lose it. And when I'm not, it's like when I was flying. When I went a month without flying, you got to move cautiously and, you know, revamp some of the dust that is accumulated in the knowledge that you had. You know, when I was flying every day, it was nothing. I mean, I knew what to do. I didn't second guess anything. But, you know, a couple months out, and yeah, you, like I say, you don't use those skills and keep up on them, and this goes with anything, you're going to lose it. Anyway, I'm just making some very broad, general statements. I don't, if I pick out an example here or there, I'm not meaning to scrutinize just one topic. I hope you understand. As far as the pay, yeah, we are, and I agree with Ms. Marshall. I'm trying to be patient with our end and see what happens as we progress through this Evergreen study. I'm not holding my breath, but we are apples and oranges. I mean, from what we've done, I think there are some areas that, you know, we can come together. And I'm just picking this out of the air because I heard it mentioned. You know, we too have employees that are probably go above and beyond what is tasked in other counties. One comes to mind, I think, the Doug Morgan. You know, Stafford has 3 of him. We have Doug. You know, he does what 3 do over in Stafford. So we have the same issues, but our employees that are having to go, you know, carry that load that others have spread out. You know, we didn't do what you have done for yours. It just didn't happen. I wish,
Change graders' salaries. They've always been on that scale. That's not new for us.
But if Doug was 40% above market, and nothing against Doug, if you're watching, nothing against you or negative, so just bear with me. You know, if he was 40, and if he was 2% above market, let's go with that. He did not get a pay raise, or he would not have gotten a pay raise. So our employees did not. Somebody over and above the market was not a COLA, but I'm talking about the yes. Okay. All right. Okay. And a what? Okay. Anyway, there are differences where I think we could. I think there are differences where we could, between y'all to maybe at least work to understanding, or where, you know, Mr. Taylor can relay to us and give us a little bit of a heads up instead of coming into a meeting like this or towards the budget season and trying to make sense of it spur of the moment, basically.
What did you have the Evergreen people present to you so you could have Q&A with them?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yep, we sure did. Like I say, I don't always agree with what was presented, put it that way. I'm trying to be very, very patient on our end. Very patient. Anyway, as far as the cost benefit, I think this is the third. And just for me, I don't know if anybody else can remember I know the first, and this is about the kids being brought in outside of the county. I know we were first told that we got the money, and when money was said, I assumed it was state, federal. And then you came back and said, no, we did not get the money, state, federal, which I assumed was we got nothing. And now this time we're at $5,000 per kid. That's what I recall of our communications about this so far. And I was just going to say on it, and this was just on the previous scenario where we didn't get anything, is that, you know, we need a cost benefit where, you know, at some point you reach a level, because some other bigger, Fairfax, I think Prince William, I'm pretty sure did it at one point, but they've ceased now. For some reason they've stopped, and at some point 1.1 million is a chunk of change out of our budget. And, you know, at some point, how high do we get? I know that, but we squabble over $500,000. So I mean, well, how many more employees do they have? So you got to calculate all that too. I'm just like I say, I'm not trying to scrutinize. I'm just saying that when, because we're going to have our constituents and those groups that are going to say, well, hey, look, there's $1.1 million if the schools will stop bringing out-of-county students. And what I'm just saying is that at some point, whatever it is, at some point, you know, you got to, where do you lose that benefit? That's all I'm trying to say. You know, this budget cycle, it was the SROs that really got us, I think, in a bind. And what I just ask, you know, and this is just my opinion, nobody else's. I'm not putting anybody else in this. But, you know, you can't just sit back and just let the sheriff and the board, and when it directly affects y'all, and I mean, I just got the feeling, an impression. I'm just trying to have communication, just that, you know, schools kicked back. I don't mean kicked back, didn't care, but kind of in the background, being quiet about everything when we're discussing these SROs, and didn't really come out and say, hey, yes, we need them. This is going to be critical to us. So we could weigh everything. And that was just me, because I voted for the budget. And that's what I think I would like to hear when there's something critical like that. And, you know, I think in the upcoming one, we're going to need to know, how do you stand on the rest of the SROs? Because we certainly didn't hold back and maybe take a breath and discuss maybe armed security or anything like that. Because now Stafford's doing it, Culpeper's doing it. I'm sure there's a bunch of others out there, and we took no time to even have discussion and really some deep thoughts about what would be best, and not only for savings, but for those individual schools and the kids and their protection. And there's certainly, I'm sure, more. I don't know what you're looking at for next year, but I would like to, at some point, maybe in we can, I'm sure, since it's with the kids, we could do some sort of confidential memo or a briefing with the boards about what your needs are for the remaining security of these schools. I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your plans? Where are we going? So we can kind of have an idea in our heads what we're going to need for next year or the outgoing years for our budget to get what you want. And as far as the security and safety of the buildings itself and stuff like that. Where are y'all going as far as that? Is it absolutely no for any more, you know, armed security? Do we need more, or do you want the SROs? And that's it, no discussion. You know, I'm trying not to stay. And Mr. Braswell and I had a pretty good discussion where, you know, I'm trying to stay out of your weeds, you know, but you know when it comes down to the money, it's hard. You know, I have my own feelings about the turf stuff and stuff like that, but I'm trying not to get involved, and I did initially when during my election, and probably the first year that I was elected, and I'm trying not to do that anymore and send more people to y'all who have issues with the schools. That way they don't come to me and before this board complain about schools when we really have no authority or really what some people say power over what you choose to do with your money that you get. And I'd like for it to stay like that. Maybe one day we can actually work to a point where we can have a fixed percentage of whatever we take in or whatever that can go to y'all, and we say here, do what you need to do, and we can wash our hands of it. And anybody having issues with what the schools do, they go to your board and not to our board or our individual members. That'd be nice. And I'll throw this. I'm sure there's going to be some comment about this, and I guess I'm giving you a heads up, or I don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, there's been talk about an independent auditor for the county. And I'm just throwing this out there because I think a citizen initially brought it up, or several citizens brought it up in conversation with their presentations, public presentations, where they were talking about having an independent auditor for the county, where we would hire this and it would report to the board or Mr. Taylor or however it worked. I don't know that we've got much out of hearing the presentation and several members saying, well, yeah, that might be a good idea. And if we did that, we could maybe disassemble the CBRC or something. Yeah, Not saying we're just disassembling the CBRC, so please don't put words in my mouth. I'm just saying that I'm sure there's going to be some more discussion about it. But I'll put it out, would it be something that this school board would be interested in? Where you'd have an independent auditor that'd look at everything y'all do. We'd have one that look at everything we do. Just a thought. We could disband the CBRC and just
We
have that
had an
individual.
independent auditor in the budget for the schools up until 2011 when it was cut with the budget cuts.
Okay.
So we've had that in our past.
Okay. Well, that's good. See, good conversation. I didn't know that. I'll just end it like that. I love our meetings like this. I hope nobody's taking things personally. I certainly don't. And I've learned some things today. I hope some others have, and I hope we can continue this dialogue and understanding of where each board comes from and the needs of each. And like I say, I think the more we can understand each other's needs and where we are, and the differences between the two, and maybe each other's boundaries, maybe we can go a little, be a little bit more cohesive and work to the benefit of the county as a whole. Yeah, I'll just stop my babbling there. Mr. Ross?
I just wanted to clarify. So since you had an independent auditor in 2011 and that was cut, if our board would hire an independent auditor, would you be willing to do an MOU with the county where one auditor could report directly to the school board and the Board of Supervisors? May I finish, please, Madam Chair? If that'd be okay. Thank you. If that would be something that the school board would be amenable to, or would you like funding for an independent auditor on your own, where we would have an independent auditor on our own? So if I could get some feedback on that?
The latter would be the case.
And why is that?
You need to have different knowledge. Like, we have federal auditors already. We have state auditors already. We are subject to multiple audits, and they have to have knowledge of each of those specific mandates, government programs, et cetera. There's whole college degrees on just finance for education.
What if we included you in the hiring process of that individual, where we could make sure they were educated and had that knowledge?
Is there a reason why you would want one versus for each?
Cost.
Okay,
cost
the
savings,
cost savings,
yes.
but then that person would have to have so much knowledge. It might be the cost to and exactly the work to, because your budget and our budget, we're about half. So you think of that amount, and then so the workload for that person. So I think it would be better to have two. One that is more knowledgeable about the schools and all of the grants, because we do have the grant funding, as Ms. Grant mentioned, but what is entailed in the schools, and then therefore, if they would be reporting to the school board and to you, versus having one to report to you. So I think it would be more feasible if there were going to be them. So one reports to the school boards on findings about the school board budget, and one to report to the supervisors on the rest of the county budget.
Okay, so what if we could find one that is qualified, has the education level, and doesn't cost the amount of two? Would that be something that the school board would support?
Mr. Chair, I would say, I think the answer, we just need, to save money, we hire a firm, an auditing firm, which would have multiple auditors that would have the skill set to look at, because we're talking fire and public safety, and so I think there's some opportunity out there. Give the statement of work, and they have multiple auditors that look at the different various things and give reports back.
Jerry Beckett already does that jointly for us and presents to us every year in November.
And Madam Chair, we also, is this the one we're talking about? Yeah, we sit on this together and we get this report. It didn't seem like it would make sense to have a redundant audit. We get one every year, and they produce this document for our edification. So I just would see it as an expensive proposition for something that we're already doing.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, we get audited too, but it seems to be a high-level audit. It's not getting down in the weeds of what the county does. and somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong. My understanding is when we get audited, they're just looking, and I'm talking the county audits, because we get audited, we're required to every year. But they're here for a short amount of time. They're looking at things at the high level. They're not looking at, say, for instance, how we procure things, not in detail, or how we, how we're budgeting things, or how the departments are running. Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. So I'm talking about somebody that's full-time staff, or a firm that actually comes in and is more. I've been on the board 7 years. We've been talking about an internal county auditor for all 7 years for that reason, even though we already get audited once a year at the high level. Mark, can you?
We do have a financial audit that's done annually, and it is, I think it includes review of processes and internal checks and balances, but may not be at the operational level that the board has been speaking to recently. So perhaps it would be beneficial to bring our auditors back to our next joint meeting even to talk in detail about the scope of service that's already provided and what other levels of service might be available to be provided if the Board of Supervisors of the school board, either or both jointly, might want them to deepen or supplement that work. But they do in their report annually work through the range of requirements that they are subject to audit to, their standards. And it is a standard audit that's done for the schools and for the general government.
Dr. Baker was.
I just would request that as the boards consider, proposing this kind of investment either individually or jointly, that I understand as a leader what the rationale or what precipitates the need. In other words, what are we desiring as outcomes? What are the goals here? Because when I first started as superintendent, we intended to put that in the budget every year, and we had at that time some reasons for it that had to do with helping us to be not only more efficient, but we did not know at that time if we would ever come out of a recession in terms of seeing substantially more revenue the following year. And so we were in a how do we continue to reduce and maintain quality mode. So we had at that time what we thought were good reasons. Now, recently it seemed as though this resurfaced from, again, I could be completely wrong, so please forgive me if I am. But it came under, again, a bit of an accusation of found money. And so I would just ask that if we're going to look at the functions of an internal auditor, it's being looked at from the perspective of how do we make both of our operations better, as opposed to where it appeared to come from was that we could help the schools not have this problem again. I may have misinterpreted. If I did, again, I apologize. But I am certainly, as a leader, open to how we could have a full-time staff person that could do a lot of the things that certainly neither one of our staffs are able to do.
Mr. Chair, if I may, it would be totally to make things more efficient.
Right.
That's where I'm coming from.
And could I chase that, Mr. Chairman, just with the point, Dr. Baker, I think what your last comment was really to a coincidence in time that to which you've been inclined as a human to impute causation when there was no causation involved. The audit concept.
That's a relief.
And I think that there are some nuanced concepts involved. The financial audit is one thing, but I think that the board's interest, at least as it's come, our board's interest as it's come to my ears, has been towards an operational audit, an evaluation of not just where the money goes or doesn't go and are the receipts collected and the chits signed and all of that, but is our operation functioning at optimal efficiency, or are our taxpayers getting best value for our effort. And I'll say that what we're finding with our financial system implementation is that is an opportunity, and I know that the school division's also in the midst of a financial system implementation. And part of that process, observe, is process mapping the existing business practices so that they can be converted from the old computer financial system to the new software system, to the new financial system. And so that mapping exercise has been a very healthy opportunity for us to begin to review, and we're just working our way into that, to review processes, to build a new chart of accounts, and that has gotten a lot of internal work activated to reviewing processes internally, and that exercise in some degree gets to this issue. But I think at times having some external help or external view on our processes at optimized for value is a legitimate or a reasonable question to ask.
Again, I am glad that it was, again, I apologize for my ignorance, not knowing that this had been a discussion that you and your board were having for a substantial amount of time. I just remember that when we, at least from the perspective of when we were floating the idea, it did not appear to be embraced broadly at that time. Now, that's when it was even tighter in terms of staffing at the time. But also when I hear certainly the hefty description of what you may be looking for, again, I would say, what do you want the individual or individuals to be doing? Because the more you explained, the more I'm thinking, if we want that person to do that for two very large organizations, that's going to be a lot. And so again, I think, what are the goals and the outcomes that we seek here? And again, I apologize for that causation, but I do think that was the first that we had heard of it being a focused interest. And so that was why I shared that.
And it certainly wasn't because of the reallocation.
Well, there was a public comment that called for that because of the reallocation.
There's been several.
So I think that's where he jumped to that, because it
I
came
definitely
right
heard
from
it
public
before.
comments.
And like I say, it wasn't until, I don't know whether it was the last one or I've heard at several board meetings where they've suggested auditors for us. And that, I say us for both entities. So.
Madam Chair, we made mention of this audit that is done jointly between both boards. And I'd like for Ms. Gaines also to discuss other audits that we subject ourselves to. This is one from Brown and Edwards where the school activity funds were audited. This is just an example of one of the internal audits that we've submitted ourselves to. I know there's external. Can you give a litany of what we expose ourselves to now?
Sure, absolutely. Overall, we basically have at least 4 audits that we subject ourselves to. You have the comprehensive annual financial audit that's joint between the schools and the county. Alongside of that, you have your A133 single audit, which is basically an audit of your federal programs based on the testing scope that they established for that year. We also have our school activity funds that are audited annually. Currently, the company that we use is Brown Edwards, and also we have federal programs, whether it's our food service programs or our title programs, which are also subject to federal review. Now, I do want to add as well, when you look at these audits, they are primarily looking at, are your financial statements materially stated? So can there be some benefits to have an internal audit? I would say absolutely yes, but when you look at the scope of the work, it may be best to have 2 or a firm. I do not believe that one auditor can handle both entities, having been an auditor myself.
And I'll say personally, I'm all for putting our position back in the budget if we could ever get to that point, because it was always been on our scope. And I definitely agree. It's a board decision, and obviously this had to be decided with my board, but that's just my personal feelings, and I totally agree with Ms. Gaines that she did that for a living before, that I take her advice that we would definitely need 2 or more a firm. And the next work session, I'd be great if the firm wants to join us.
Mr. Akabasi?
Thank you. So I'm going to take advantage of your previous experience and ask you some questions then. Would it be advantageous then to have somebody who's inside the organization that answers to the person that cuts their paycheck? Or would it be more helpful if we're looking for an operational, just to get an idea of where we stand, to have an outside firm come in and do a in-depth, detailed audit that they then come and present to us what those findings are, and then we can use that as a baseline of who we are and what we are. Because right now we have no idea. I mean, we think and we hope that we're functioning as efficiently as possible, but more than likely there's always room for improvement. Well, where is that, and how can we find that? And is that a better function of having somebody come from the outside looking in than have somebody go through the hiring process, look at all of us, and realize that they answer to us? And at that point, then, can you also get the benefit of that firm behind them to do maybe a one-time, and it will obviously be sizable, to do that one time, and then from there we can then decide if this is a position we want to hire, on a full-time basis.
In my professional opinion, just because you asked, as a certified public accountant, certified public manager, a certified Virginia school business official, and a certified administrative school finance operations, this is my answer. I would say, number one, because of the reporting relationship, you want to make sure if you do hire an internal auditor that that individual should report to the board for the county and the board for the school board. Because other than that, you can have a conflict of interest. You can have a situation where that employee may feel as if they may be reprimanded, because you just never know where the issues could potentially be. So that's number one. Number two, I would say when you look at Spotsylvania County Schools, we've been subject to Gibson efficiency reviews. All different types of studies. That's one time. That is great as a point in time, but when you look at an organization such as our size, we could benefit from an internal auditor. We really could. Because you have new laws coming in every year. There's always opportunities to do your checks and balances and your internal controls. But the key is the investment. It would be a worthy investment, in my opinion.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you're not going to be billing us for that advice either. But I would like to see who else does it. Obviously, the bigger counties, see what they have, and if it's been successful or not. All those standard questions that we ask before we jump in with both feet, just to gauge. This could be something in our mind that is bigger than in actuality it turns out to be. And so I don't want to go ahead and hire somebody full-time at a very high salary, which I'm sure it's going to be, for something that doesn't turn out to produce. And then is there that pressure that you must produce? And what is that? And why? And all that kind of stuff goes into it. So whenever we're going to have the presentation from staff, that kind of information would be helpful. And thank you, Ms. Gaines.
It's interesting what Mrs. Gaines referenced in terms of the Gibson study, because I do remember that's how the position came about, where I was doing both roles at that time. And we're looking at efficiencies, and it doesn't necessarily mean less cost. It may actually be more cost because of the investment in order to gain efficiencies. But that was done in a point in time, and since then we've had the recessions. Since then we had the idea of having an internal auditor we had many, many years ago, and I had asked for it too, because I realized that what was referenced in terms of the schools and the operation side and so much money that's being handled, that it is important to take a look at that and have someone with independent eyes looking at it, because it's impossible for the finance office to do except spot checks, audits and reviews. I guess what I'm saying is that study that was done, Gibson, which yielded a lot of information, and we were criticized for doing it, but it did yield a lot of good information that came out of it, and we put a lot of it to good use. But it does cost. There was a significant amount of cost involved in it, and some of it was being funded by the state because the state wanted to see efficiencies that would be generated. But that was a point in time, it has long passed, and we have actually done a lot of restructuring, both administratively and instructionally, as we're looking at how to best utilize our staffing. And even to the point of our compensation plan coming off of the Evergreen study, which we can see faults in it, but, you know, we still had to do something that, because we have situations, we have problems that we need to be addressing. Because just like Mr. Marshall spoke of career things, we have built-in career things that our teachers think, which is, you know, where a person is on that step for 5 years. You know, that's not something we want to have, but there were things that happened because of mandates that came, you know, down from the state, and we had to implement those mandates, which built in problems for us now. And we're trying to get out of it. The recession hit, and we couldn't get out of it anymore. And we're still trying to get out of it. So I, you know, am totally in favor of an internal auditor because I think it could help us. But as Dr. Baker said, the scope needs to be well-defined and the expertise of that individual, and it needs to report to the board. And I think that is critical. Each board, you know, and that we need to define what our expectations are. Because I'm sure with 7 different board members, we're going to have 7 different expectations. Guaranteed, at least. So with that, I am wholly in favor of it. It's finding the funding, because it was there a long time ago, and things have really changed since then. You know, with Dr. Baker being the superintendent, has implemented a lot of changes. You know, we're not the same as we were 10, 12 years ago. No way, shape, or form. We're actually much, much better. But we're lean and mean, guarantee you. Maybe too lean and too mean, too. Keep that in mind. Because you can get so lean that you don't have any redundancy built in. You don't have any backups. You can get too lean and too mean. But internal auditor, yes. Thank you.
That's good to hear. You use some good, too lean, too mean, and I think the county is probably in that same boat too. I mean, we've cut and cut and cut, and now we have 7 different individuals on the board, and there's going to be several that say there's still more cutting to do. But man, having come from 2 different departments, I don't know where else we could cut, except take equipment and personnel out of the equation, and I don't think the citizens want that. But anyway,
well,
good dialogue. I see.
And moving forward, for strategic planning purposes and in an effort to help with long-term planning and to provide sustainable funding for compensation proposals, we can bring up the revenue sharing agreement that I'm always the one that brings it up every year since 2014 in every work session. And Supervisor Yakubowski and I were put on a committee last June when we had a joint work session to gather information, and Mrs. Gaines has worked as well. And I sent this around. It said Mr. Benton on it. It should have gotten him by now. So he can scan this and distribute any information if you guys would like. But this is just an example that current revenue sharing agreements, that whether they are in writing or in gentleman's agreement, are in Prince William County, Albemarle, Hampton City, Virginia Beach, Arlington, City of Roanoke, Roanoke County, Accomack, Chesapeake, Manassas City, Manassas Park, and Waynesboro. And they all have settled, of course, on wherever their priority is for the percent of the general fund. One is Prince William's, of course, general fund less recordation tax. Okay, recordation. The Albemarle one is local tax revenues with general property tax, sales tax, etc. So they all have different variables that go into the agreement. So we've gave just an overview of and the wording of all of them if you want to reference it. And as I've said in every work session, what the school boards in these areas find beneficial about this is it just makes it easier to plan. From year to year, whatever you decide the priority is, if you say we want to fund the schools at 50% of the general fund, we are aware if the fund goes up, we'll get that much more funds. If the fund goes down, we get this much more funds. It's just easier to plan on. There's not a voting on tax rate as far as the school's portion of the tax rate. That stays steady. And then if there's more money, they get the same percentage. There's less money coming in, it's a less percentage. And it just keeps a way for us to be able to plan from year to year as far as school boards go. Mr. Yakubowski could tell you if there's any benefits that he's found from the Board of Supervisors end, but that is just the school board's perspective on why it's beneficial.
Maybe. It really comes down to whether or not, we used to have a revenue sharing agreement years ago, 67 of undesignated new, that wasn't an offer. That was, that was simply stating what was. But of new dollars that were coming in. So that was something that the county used to do, and that was done because of capital, Mr. Meyer, you might remember the capital expense and everything that was increasing. So it was a formula that had, right, correct. And so that was a way that was done. From my perspective, it's helpful, but the only, well, not the only drawback, but one of the drawbacks is that it sets a certain number even if priorities change. And that, can get into complications. Well, you said that you will give, but then we have a need over here that comes up. So, there's benefits and there's drawbacks to doing it. But as we see, our budget is going to be hit with the transportation fund deficit over the next couple of years, and our general fund revenue will be decreasing. We need to figure out a way. I don't know what it is, but we need to figure out something that would be easier for the schools to understand that this is a percentage, maybe of new dollars minus X, Y, whatever we come up with. But it definitely works in some places, but as you notice, there's lots of places that don't have it. And I think that, we might want to explore it some or not, but I'm not sold on it. Let me just put it that way. I know that from the school's budgeting perspective, it's helpful, but from our perspective, or my perspective, I should say, it boxes you in a little bit. So.
I'll just speak as Greg. I'm certainly open to looking into it, and maybe Mr. Taylor can put it on our agenda at some point to have so we can have some discussion on it. But pros and cons as thoroughly and as far out as you can go. And Mr. Taylor, I'm going to slide this down to you. And maybe, if you don't mind, maybe distributing what you feel is necessary for the board, all the board members. I don't know if just a top sheet, or then you can delve into the real weeds of it in a presentation to us, and then maybe next time we can have more discussion and dialogue on that topic with the two boards together. I'll certainly stay open-minded about it, that's for sure. And I think it would alleviate a lot of this board's issues and discussions every year during budget session. And I think we both have to have some flexibility in it if we do come up with something where, because either side's entity's side, priorities can change. We could have an influx of students and need to build 4 more schools. So it will change the whole. It needs to be fluid to some degree. So, just my comments, Mr. Skinner.
I'll add to this because I was with Jim when we were on the school board, and Mr. Yakubowski brings out a really good point, and that is we needed schools at that time, and we put a lot of money into the schools. The county gave us the 67%. But shortly following that, we also had needs for a public building here. We had a justice building here. And when you go in there and you start setting a percent, I think it's very dangerous. I think what we look at is the overall needs of the county, which includes the school system. because they did give us an awful lot of money to open Riverbend High School, Cedar Forest, I believe the other one was. That was because we had the need, we had the influx of the students. And then we stopped, and we needed the money because we were required to put up a new justice building and a new safety building, the buildings that we had to do ourselves. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I don't think you have to be flexible, number one, and that's it. And I think that's just a matter of being able to communicate and looking at the future, a strategic plan as we're trying to do as far as what do you need. We've always come back to school. When do you, the question has been asked for 15 years, pretty close, okay? When do you need the next high school? Nobody can tell that because your system is changing. It wasn't the same way. You know, how many different programs you have and stuff of this nature and what the state has put mandates on you about. So I'm not sure the answer is say we're going to split 50-50 or we're going to split 68 to you and 32 to us or whatever it might be. I think it's just a matter of communication and giving us both information out front and just being able to be prepared. I think if we're thinking about it happens, that's good. If we're thinking it's going to happen but it doesn't, that's good too. Okay, so I don't see a place where we ever come down and say we're going to give you 68 or 65 or 60-40. That's just not right because we're a county, and a county has a school system, okay? And that's how we have to support the school system, but we can't do it on a regular basis saying you're going to get this much money. It's great for planning, but then what do we do when you need new high schools or new middle schools? A new elementary, or we need a new building, a DSS building, you know. So anyway, I just wanted to say I think we just have to be strategically planning for what we think we're going to need in the future and communicate that. And we can tell you what our needs are too. So thank you.
Anybody else? I'll give the floor to you, Madam Chair.
Any closing comments from my fellow board members?
Mr. Marshall.
Mr. Benton, I just like to, you addressed earlier in your comments about the children that we have coming into the county from other areas. Had the 225 kids that we had. We've been given that number of $5,000 per kid. I started doing some numbers. I'm gonna run them by you real quick. I think we can kind of. I think what I'm getting ready to present to you will kind of put it to rest. At least it does for me. At $5,000 per kid, we got 225 kids. That's $1,125,000. If you break it down, and you can break this down a lot of ways, but this is a very simple way of doing it. 25 kids per classroom, one teacher per 25 kids. That one teacher cost us at a baseline with benefits of $66,000. You take that 66, multiply it by 9 because that's how many teachers you would need to get the 225. That's $594,000. Subtract that 594 from that 1,125,000. That's $531,000 for the other costs for those 225 children. That's they don't cost us any transportation because the parents are employees and they're bringing them to school, and also having that benefit to those parents and those teachers, that helps us retain staff and retain good teachers. I don't know what if we break it down, how much a desk costs, how much an English book costs for each one of them. I could do that. I'd need a lot more time. I really think we're money ahead allowing that 225 kids to come here.
Mr. Chair, I guess you don't, if you had a breakdown of those 225, if there were special needs in there, then you're talking a different, we would throw them out of there. And I don't think that we're allowed to know due to HIPAA
It
policy,
has been requested, but we cannot release
what that number is.
Well, it's numbers like that, and I would just say I'm not against it, so.
But at the same time, numbers like that would mean that if we grow 300 students, it's a good thing for the county. But it reaches a point where it's no longer a good thing for the county as far as costs go because you're going to need that new school, right?
And that's what I was getting at. I understand, Dr. Baker, why it's done. I certainly, the board, I get it. I do. And that's all I was trying to say at the time was, at some point you lose the benefit that you're given, and not to get back on this topic, but I support it. I understand why you do it. It is a good thing to help retain the teachers that do live out of the county. And if we're getting, like I say, I was under this understanding that, see, I've learned more today, that, we got nothing. So that was my understanding of it. So I did not, apparently somewhere in the communication down the line, the last 2 times it was discussed, excuse me, I did not either hear or get the 5,000 out of it. So, but no, I appreciate the board coming together like this. I think we've had some great dialogue. I think, I just, the more we do this, the more we get an understanding of each other, and I'll turn it over and just say, I'm just wrapping up, at least on my end. I just appreciate y'all coming and every individual here, both boards, and having this dialogue. Thank you.
Dr. Baker, did you have closing comments?
I think we're ready to close.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
We're going to take a quick 10-minute break, just to let y'all know.
We review the guidelines briefly. Guidelines for public presentations are as follows. These presentations are an opportunity for citizens to present matters that you believe deserve the board's attention. This is not part of a public hearing. Sign up to speak at each public hearing is separate. Public presentations are one-way communication from citizens to the Board of Supervisors. This is not a forum for dialogue or debate. To make a public presentation, please sign up on the provided sign-up sheet and please print clearly. Come to the lectern when your name is called. Clearly state your name, address, and voting district for our record. Address your comments directly, please, to the Board of Supervisors. State whether you're speaking on your own behalf, in which case you'll have 3 minutes to speak, or state if you are speaking on behalf of a recognized group, in which case you'll have 5 minutes to speak. Public presentations shall not be used to address matters of the subject of public hearings or to make political campaign speeches, private advertisements, or personal attacks. Written comments are always welcomed. There is a light on the podium. Green means go. Yellow means you have 30 seconds to sum up. When the light turns red, your microphone will be turned off. Amy?
The first speaker is John Buckley, followed by Willard Carter.
All right, good evening. My name is John Buckley, and I'm from the Cortland District. Even though it's dated, I don't know if Amy got a chance to pass out the copies of the article from the Freelance Star. I would like to point out 2 of the 3 stories that happened in 2007 titled Abuse Cases Show History of Problems, where Mikey's father, Michael, and stepmother, Shelley Rogers, had been indicted 6 weeks earlier on charges stemming from Mikey's death. 5-year-old Mikey Rogers bled out from abdominal wounds for 3 days, losing 1/4 of his blood. An autopsy showed the Spotsylvania County boy had other injuries consistent with chronic abuse. When social services did take the parents to court, it was asked for services such as parenting classes for the Rogers. In 2003, a 15-month-old girl drowned in the bathtub after her father left her alone and went to sleep. 5 months earlier, Monique Jules nearly drowned and had to be resuscitated after her father left her alone in the bathtub. Social services investigated and determined there was no child abuse. Ronald Jules was told to attend parenting classes. After her death, he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. It's amazing how the Spotsylvania DSS offered parenting classes to these killers. On the one end of the spectrum, these are grave mistakes made by the Spotsylvania DSS in these horrific stories, and now they are making egregious mistakes on the opposite spectrum by keeping our son and not offering nothing to us to get him back, even though, or on our own initiative, have attended several parenting classes, individual counseling, psychological assessments, and volunteered our home for multiple visits by the Military Family Advocacy, yet do not pass go directly to adoption. Yet these killers in this article are offered reunification by taking parenting classes. With all due respect to some members of the board, confidentiality is not really protecting children, but violating their civil rights as well as keeping the public from really knowing what's going on. Nobody's really ever going to know the impact of what's happening in our community because of paperwork. We are letting paperwork keep our vulnerable children in dangerous and fatal situations and letting children who are loved and safe away from caring and loving parents. Some of you were on the board when these horrific stories happened back in 2003, 2006, and I'm wondering what you did back then to prevent this from happening, or did you vote against another DSS board for holding them accountable? You know who you are. You should be liable to prevent these atrocities, but you didn't. That was uncovered by the Freelance Star back in 2007. In the spirit of transparency with you, I can share what the Spotsylvania DSS gave me this week to get ready for my administrative hearing. So you can discern for yourself if I'm able to raise Juan Antonio. Thank you.
Willard Carter, followed by Sherry Carter.
Good evening. My name is Willard Carter, and I'm living in the Berkeley district. I'm here to ask for your help with reunification of Juan Antonio and to his family. I was surprised you, Mr. Marshall, voted in the Berkeley district, voted no to the last meeting. And Mr. Benton, the Livingston district, voted no. And Mr. Skinner, a retired various Marine, voted against an active serviceman and his family. I was not surprised Yugoslavia voted no after your speech you gave the last time, that I was sure the board had no power in circumstances. I don't believe that you other three voted no, really believe that either. If you did, you had no influence. You have all voted yes just to get us out of your house. My granddaughter Surrender was visiting us last weekend, and she asked Grandma, why have they not returned Juan Antonio and his family? We couldn't give an answer because we didn't understand either. If she was standing here with me, I don't think any one of you could give her an answer to the question. You might tell her maybe it's an adult situation and she's too young to understand. I replied that I am over 70 years old and I don't understand. I'm asking this board to help establish a social service board similar to other counties in Virginia to hold the Spotsylvania Department of Social Service accountable so they can't pay guard or pay our money with our children. Thank you.
Sherry Carter, followed by Alma Buckley.
Sherry Carter, Berkeley District. We all know why I'm here, to see Juan Antonio brought home. The Bible that our laws and county was founded upon states in Romans 13:1, everyone must submit to the governing authorities. We know that the challenge of this command occurs when our authority figures make decisions that we do not understand or agree with, and we wonder if they know all the facts. We all know the three wise monkey story that come out of Japan. Together they embody the proverbial principle, see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. The board has heard from Gail Crooks, DSS Director of Spotsylvania County, at length about their operation, how they are overworked, understaffed, have a large turnover, and can't be right 100%. What a waste of taxpayers and county's money to refuse to say, we were wrong. You have heard from pastors, deacons, CIA agents, lawyers, armed forces, retired and active, county workers, citizens that have worked in social service, government workers, teachers, mothers, fathers, grandparents, church family, and friends about the exemplary character of John and Alma Buckley. You have seen and heard from all their children except the two little boys. After all this, you fail to speak up and do all you can with the influence you have, and you have become, some of you, like three unwise monkeys that prefer to see no evil, hear no evil, and not to speak up for justice. I will end with a poem by a German Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller. It was written because of the Holocaust. Some of you may believe we should change histories and take our historical statues down and pretend that the Jewish Holocaust never happened. If we change or do away with the truth of our history, we will not learn from it, and we are destined to repeat it. You will find this written at many Holocaust memorials and museums throughout the U.S. and in Jerusalem. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. If we don't stand by the Buckley family while their parental rights are being taken away from them, which is the ability to make major decisions about their child's health, education, and religious upbringing, which the court can terminate when extreme neglect or violence towards the child has occurred. And it didn't occur, and it was proven in criminal court with the motion to strike. Then they came for Juan Antonio, and I did.
Ma'am, your time has expired. I'm sorry.
Alma Buckley, followed by Jody Nicholson.
Alma Buckley, Cortland District. I wanted to start off by saying, reiterating something that Mr. Jakubowski had said, that we need to have outside providers looking in to ensure that DSS is operating in good faith and fair dealing with each and every case that they handle. That written, oral, or implied contracts between DSS staff and parents are being followed through. Mr. Skinner had made a comment earlier to the school board telling them that they should continue to ask and look into, I believe it's something to do with the insurance, because the worst that can happen is that you get a no. And I'm asking you guys, you have the influence, and when the opportunity was given to you guys to vote, to have a committee look into our case, and many of you voted no, because you were coming up with all these reasons as to what the committee could possibly do, and I'm telling you, let the committee worry about that. You do your part and just vote yes, and let them decide if they can do anything to help us, because then you're cutting us short. We're coming to you for help, and you have the opportunity to help. So I'm just asking and pleading with you guys, vote yes, let the committee decide if they can or cannot do. Now, another thing real quick here is that I have been trying to get health records, medical records of my son, Juan Antonio, for over a year. On April 19, we received an email from Gail Crooks, who says that if we wish to access medical records of JP, you would access those records from medical providers directly by Virginia Code 20-124.6, saying, notwithstanding any other provision of law, neither parent, regardless of whether such parent has custody, shall be denied access to the academic or health records of that parent's minor child. I have been making phone calls to a dentist, allergist, and gastroenterologist. I have 3 more. Each of them have told me that I cannot have any information, that the information can only be given to the foster parents. Ms. Gail Crooks was the one who put in a memo. She is violating her own code, a Virginia code. We asked for this information, and she's putting a memo in there, and I'm asking you guys, please look into this. They're not following their process or procedures. I know you guys want to let this just kind of work itself out, but it's not working itself out. So please do what you can. Thank you.
Jody Nicholson, followed by Jeff Walschlager.
I have 3 paragraphs here, gentlemen. I'm not even going to attempt to read in 3 minutes, but I'm going to start out in the middle here, and I'd like to make a comment at the end. I have witnessed the Buckley family in various settings, from children's birthday parties to outdoor activities, in an average church service to some that were anything but ordinary, in their own home during social visits, and in professional work environments that were strictly business. Never have I seen anything that would lead me to believe that they were ever anything but the best parents for their children. On the contrary, with that many kids, they're like a well-oiled machine, quite honestly. The Bible says that children are a gift from God, and the Buckleys value each one of these children, each one of these like the treasures that they are, which is why it's such a travesty that their youngest has been taken away from them. God, and I repeat that, God gave Juan Antonio to them, and without some solid, concrete evidence proving that they are unfit to do the task of parenting him, God should be the only one that is allowed to take him from them. While we're on the subject of God, I would like to point out to you a couple of passages in the Bible that are very applicable to this very situation. In Luke chapter 11, verses 5 through 10, it gives an example of an individual who knocks in the middle of the night, disturbing his neighbor, and eventually gets what he came for. The Bible says, I say to you, though he would not rise and give him, because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity or his bold willingness, he will rise and give him as many as needed. In that same book, over just a few pages, in chapter 18, it gives another example, a similar one, of a widow who came to a judge asking for justice to be served on her adversary. Persistently, she asked for justice time and time again. Eventually, the judge within himself says, although I do not fear God, nor regard man, because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. I don't know any of you personally. I think I've only met one of you. Maybe I've seen you at a 7-Eleven or something. I don't know any of you. However, you say you didn't have power to do this. I can tell you, I'm a small business owner. When you're the one that controls the paycheck, you're the one that has all the power. And I think each of you know that. And this is a tremendous injustice for this family. And as long as you control that paycheck, you control the power. So nothing more than going to somebody and saying, hey, please just look into this one. Call one of your buddies, call one of your friends, because we all have them. We all know how that works. And all it takes is a phone call from somebody who has authority to make things happen, to get it done. I have to do the same thing in my business when a guy doesn't show up for work and I have to get A, B, and C done. Okay, you'll get your paycheck when A, B, and C gets done. So please, you do have the power. Use that power to make something happen. We learned a lot here in this, having to sit here for 3 hours through this.
Sir, your time has expired. Thank you.
Jeff Walschlager.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Walschlag. I'm a resident of Stafford County. During the last meeting, as you've been reminded, the board voted 4-3 against the motion asking the Social Services Advisory Board to follow up with DSS on the Buckley case. As an observer, it appeared to me that the motion was a spontaneous idea, and I can understand a no vote in the context that the board did not have an opportunity to consider the motion at length. With that in mind, I think it's a good idea to reconsider the motion this evening, now that a week has passed and the two concerns I heard that were raised can be addressed. First concern was that the advisory board would not have access to private information. I would respond that a Spotsylvania County judge has evaluated the private information and dismissed the case. That is real and useful information for an advisory board to consider. More importantly, I would say an advisory board does not need the private information at all to function effectively. An advisory board advises. An advisory board offers an outside perspective. They can say things like this: this Buckley case doesn't seem to have the fact pattern of a normal case, and there is a growing public voice that says your organization is getting it wrong. Can you follow up with your staff to make sure everything is going the way it should? That's an advisory board. Simple. Or something like this: this case is turning into a big deal, and the impact of your decision is going to have an outsized impact on the reputation of DSS in Spotsylvania County. You need to make sure your staff is getting this right. Please take a closer look and report back to us. That's an advisory board. This is helpful feedback for an organization, and it is precisely the type of thing an advisory board can provide. The second reason I heard for a no vote was that the board already sent a letter to the state. I would respond that the advisory board is a local level mechanism that can help you accomplish your goals for Spotsylvania County, your goal meaning the Board of Supervisors. It is a part of the process by statute. It's not going around the process. There is no reason for you as the board to proactively and unnecessarily surrender options available to you. This case has the potential of being an issue that will weigh heavily upon people's opinion of Spotsylvania County. The question becomes, will that opinion be, Spotsylvania County is a family-unfriendly place, I would not want to live there, or will it be Spotsylvania County did all it reasonably could to help reunite a family? Economically stable and upwardly mobile families will be more inclined to pay their property tax dollars somewhere else if Spotsylvania County gets a reputation for being family unfriendly. And as you discussed tonight, the funding challenges you discussed could become an even greater concern moving forward if the county gets that type of reputation. I ask you to vote yes for what I'm calling a reconsidered motion. To do so is not just in the Buckley's best interests, it's in the best interests of Spotsylvania County. Thank you.
There are no other citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anybody that did not sign up to speak that wishes to do so now?
Yes, thank you. Scott Szymanski from Stafford County. I'm here because we've been here a few weeks ago. I want to talk again about second chances, because research indicates and shows that achieving a timely family reunification has many benefits, not only for children and families, but also for communities and human services. The preference for reunification is rooted in the idea that children do best when raised in a safe, stable family, and mainly with their own biological parents. This is not just a victory for the Commonwealth of Virginia, but for parents and children looking for a second chance to build a bond that makes strong families stronger, and in turn, strong communities. So encouraging reunification helps families and communities know that the child welfare is not just concerned about the safety of the children, but they also believe in helping families stay together. Just remember, stronger families make stronger communities and a better society. Thank you again for your time.
Is there anybody else that did not sign up that wishes to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public presentations. Board reports?
Board reports, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Yakubowski.
None this evening.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yeah, Mr. Taylor, just I'd asked before, and whether or not we vote on it tonight or just put it on the agenda to reappoint Catherine Dennis to the DSS board. So she's already, so either.
We have a resume on file, so I believe a motion would be in order with all of the board members here if you wanted to make that motion.
Well, while I'm here, I'd like to motion to reappoint Catherine Dennis to the DSS board.
Any discussion? All right, I'll call the vote. Sorry, Amy. Thought you were a mind reader. All right, I think we're good. Well, here we go.
Okay. That's good. All right, thanks.
Mr. Ross?
Nothing to report.
Mr. Skinner? Mr. Marshall?
No report.
Dr. Trampy? No report. Main thing I wanted to tell citizens was that as far as our retreat, back in the earlier part of May, we did make some, believe it or not, make some progress on the strategic plan. It's still work in progress, but I think we made some pretty good advances and progress in it. So be patient with us, and hopefully we'll have more to come. And that's it.
Brings us to closed session, Mr. Chairman.
Carl, it's you.
This will be a resolution to adjourn into closed meeting, whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn into closed meeting for the consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically regarding a utilities matter, and whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2 3711A8, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforementioned matters.
So moved.
All right. Motion by Mr. Yakubowski. Call the question. All right.
In accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene into closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Aye.
Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Mr. Skinner.
Aye.
Mr. Marshall.
Aye.
Dr. Trampy.
Aye.
Chair aye. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All ayes, ayes.
Aye.
Nays? There you go. Sorry, Amy.
I can't get to work.